Whenever you're ready to drift off, settle your shoulders and let your breath grow easy. Tonight, let's quietly explore 4 rooms of patient work. We will begin at an island press, where olives meet stone and a slow thread of green light fills a shallow bowl. Then we'll sit with a round of warm brass in Baghdad, where a careful hand teaches a small disk to understand the sky. After that, we'll climb into a cool loft above a coral lane, where canvas finds its long curve and palm fiber twine learns to hold wind, and we will end in deep winter light. Beside a crescent stone lamp that turns oil into a house's calm, the pace will stay slow. The words will be simple, nothing sudden. We will notice tools and textures, the weight of a beam, the scratch of a file, the tug of twine, the quiet breath of a wick. If your mind wanders, it is welcome to wander and return. There is nowhere to arrive except rest. As you settle in for the night, listen for small sounds, chuck dust under sandals, tea cooling in a clay cup, snow remembering footsteps. When you feel ready, we'll step into dawn on Crete, where stone feels warm under a modest lamp, and olives wait their turn under a patient beam. The door curtain lifts with a soft hand and falls again. Dust motes hang like lazy stars in the slant of morning light. Inside, the workshop is a room of low benches, shallow trays, and tools that prefer small noses. Brass blanks sleep stacked like quiet moons. A reed pen rests across an ink dish as if it were a bridge for ants. Somewhere nearby, a teacup forgets a little steam into the air. We begin again with simple things, a round plate of brass, a scribe's line, and a file with a steady appetite. The master sits cross-legged on a mat by the window, the bench pulled close so his spine need not argue with the day. His robe is cotton, light but friendly. A leather apron covers his lap where filings fall. The brass blank in his hands is cool and heavy for its size. He presses its edge to the file and draws it toward himself in even strokes. SSSS, SSS, never hurried, never weak. Each pull leaves a tiny curl of metal that sings against the wood of the tray when it lands. When the circle's edge feels right to his fingertip, no burr, no snag, he tests it on the flat of the bench. The plate lies true, it does not rock. He nods, the way a person nods to a well-mannered door that closes without protest. With a caliper, he checks thickness at 3 points, then a 4th for luck. Brass can wander while it cools from sheet to circle. This one stayed home. At a second bench, the apprentice prepares ink. He grinds soot into a bowl with a little gum and a breath of water until it turns from black to work. He touches the reed nib to the surface, rests his wrist on the bench, and draws a practice circle on a scrap of smooth bone to wake his hand. The circle almost closes, the tiny gap pleases him. In a room of perfect arcs, a nearly perfect one is a kind reminder that hands make this, not machines. The master lifts a compass whose points are kind to metal, one sharpened to a pin, the other cradling the reed pen. He sets the pin in the very center of the plate, found by crossing 2 measured chords. The pen foot travels the rim and draws a ring of ink that glows almost blue on yellow brass. A second ring follows, then a third, each at a deliberate distance, the future lip of the mother plate, the trough for the star lattice, the boundary for the scales that will live on the back. The room smells faintly of brass and gum, and a note of lemon from a cloth that once wiped a table clean. Gentle commentary belongs here. An astrolabe is a sky you can hold a stack of plates for different latitudes, a back with scales, a rotating rate that carries bright stars, and a pointer to read the angle of sun or star above the horizon. By day it tells where the sun sits, by night it tells where you are under the sky. Complex in future use, it begins as this: circles, lines, and trust in hands. The apprentice brings the plate of pitch, a shallow pan filled with dark resin that remembers heat and forgives slips. They warm it near the brazier until it softens like date paste. The master nests the brass disc into the pitch so it will hold firm when points press and saws sing. He smooths the pitch around the rim with a stick and raises the pan on a short block to a comfortable height. Now the small sky begins. On a thin overlaying sheet, the tympan for 1 latitude, he pricks points for the omukanters, those quiet circles of equal altitude. He uses a pricker with a keen tip and a promise to be polite. Each tiny dent is a whisper of where a line will live. The apprentice follows with the reed pen, drawing through the pricks so ink finds its puffs. The latitude line curves like a cradle. As it moves, those sky meridians cross them like fine reeds in a basket. The pattern looks like rippled sand in a shallow stream, calm and true. At another tray lies the future, the lace of brass that will carry star pointers. Its outline is sketched thin in ink, a circle with petals and bridges, open work that will let the engraved sky beneath show through. The master pricks positions for bright stars, writing names with a bone stylus so letters guide, not shout. Aldebaran, Deneb, Fomalhaut, Arcturus. Names that travel with sailors and shepherds and those who rise before dawn to turn toward prayer. The jeweler's saws rest in a row, each with a different pitch to the teeth, their frames a patient black. He chooses the blade that sings high for fine cuts. He tightens it with a small twist until it answers with a note he trusts. The first cut begins at a drilled pilot hole. The blade noses in, and with slow forward strokes, a window opens in the brass. The apprentice holds the pan steady with both palms, feeling the saw's rhythm. Filings dust the pitch like pale pollen. When the blade holds, it is not scolded, it is replaced. Many blades will give their thin lives today. The master treats each with the respect due to a friend doing exactly what it was made to do. On the back plate, the scale for degrees draws itself and small marks the outermost ring that counts the circle's story from 0 to 360. Between degree ticks, the master will later cut a few tiny notches for half degrees where the hand often lands. Inside that ring, he inks a calendar scale. The months will parade around the rim not with pictures, just with letters and the number of days they want this year. Here in Baghdad, scholars know calendars like gardeners know water. A year is not a simple thing. Tea arrives the way a bird lands there, and then you realize it has been there a moment. A neighbor from the courtyard sets down a small brass tray with 2 cups and a dish of dates. Steam curls like writing. The master finishes a cut before he touches the cup. The apprentice, in the meantime, counts the stars already pricked and finds comfort in the count. They sip. The tea is mint with a kindness of sugar. A date splits under thumb and gives its soft grain. Energy returns without excitement. The apprentice asks, with the modest tone of someone leaning on curiosity rather than pride, how the instrument will find noon. The master sets the cup aside and taps the back plate where the shadow rule will live, a simple folded shape that stands at the plate's center. Here, he says, when the sun stands highest, the shadow makes its shortest mark. Noon tells itself. He adds, but remember, a city is a fingertip wide. A rooftop is a little world. One must be content with near, or else one never eats. He returns to the reed. A star pointer grows under the slender tongue of brass that will end in a tiny leaf, each leaf a place for a name. He files the leaf to a softness that welcomes touch. With the point of a polished nail, he insets a dot at the leaf tip so the star will have a bright tiny home even in low light. Later, a wash of blackened wax will flow into letters and lines, then wipe away from the high places, leaving ink in the groove's clarity without noise. Gentle commentary may rest here. The Astrolabe joined craft with study. Hands that cut brass and hands that read books met at the bench. In some shops, a scholar would dictate numbers. In others, the maker held both file and figures. Either way, patience turns circles into meaning. The morning thins toward the hour when the lane outside grows busier. Donkey hooves, the seller of pomegranates calling a kind phrase, a copper worker tapping a bell to show it now rings true. Inside, the bench keeps its quieter drum. The apprentice rubs the plate with pumice water in circles that cross and cross again, until the brass loses its harsh glare and becomes a soft mirror. The master pricks the center for the rule they alidade that will later draw a line from sighted star across the scales. He checks his points, counts his bridges, and pauses to look at the whole. The piece on the pitch looks like a garden trellis or the skeleton of a leaf. He nods once again, that private agreement with work, and lays the saw aside. Let the blade cool, he says, and swaddles it in a cloth. The apprentice smiles because he has learned that tools, too, get tired. Sunlight slides a thin finger across the floor and touches the tray of filings. Each curl of brass shines and then forgets. The room breathes. When the blade has forgotten its heat, the master returns to the bench and to the lace of brass pinned in pitch. The reed has the look of a delicate garden, petals and bridges, open air between. He draws it closer and chooses a burin whose tip is shaped like a small chisel. Its handle carries the shine of many palms. He tests its bite on a scrap and listens for the right small rasp. Star names come first. The apprentice opens a thin booklet of notes, its pages rubbed smooth by careful use. He reads softly so the words do not grow proud. Aldabern, he says, then spells it as the master wants the letters. The burin leans and draws each line into the brass leaf at the end of a pointer. The grooves sit narrow and deep, not for show, but to take a filling later. The name fits its space the way water fits a cup, no crowding, no yawning gaps. Another leaf receives Suel where sailors find comfort, another Nash, another Altair. The letters become a necklace around the sky's edge. The master pauses between names to wipe the tip of the burin on a strip of leather charged with a whisper of oil. The tool enjoys this, and so does the line. A quiet rhythm emerges. Read, brief, cut, lift, wipe, look. The apprentice sets a small dish of beeswax and lampblack near the brazier where it can grow modestly soft. He kneads the mix with a stick until it turns from stubborn to friendly. When the master has finished a ring of names, he warms the brass with the flat of his palm, then pushes the dark wax into every letter and slender groove with a cotton rag, working across the metal rather than along it. The instrument looks ruined for a moment, as if night had spilled. This is part of the charm, trusting mess to teach clarity. A clean cloth, dampened with a breath of oil, wipes the high faces. Black remains in the cuts. The brass lifts its own color again. Letters wake and remain steady even when the room turns dim. The apprentice smiles at the trick he already knows and will enjoy teaching later to someone else. Now the back mother and judge. The brass disc that will carry the scales lies face up on a support ring, lampset laid on lightly to make lines easier to see while cutting. The master sets a divider to the radius of the outermost degree circle and scratches a confident ring. Then, leaning over with the burin, he cuts the degree marks one by one, long ticks at tens, shorter at fives, hair thin at ones. The circle becomes time you can touch. He does not count aloud, yet the marks come true as if a hand could hear numbers. Inside the degrees, a calendar. This ring is a little slower procession of months with their lengths, a modest nod to the sun's year alongside the lunar observations scholars argue over with pleasure. He writes short names in neat Qulliq letters, not for flair, but for steadiness. Tishrin Canaan, the forms used in the circles of those who talk with astronomers and merchants both. A second hand sweeps across with a fine needle to prick where each month trades places with the next. Then the burin joins those points into a soft chain. Closer to the center, the unequal hours for daylight, the system that notices summer's longer breath and winter's economy. The master chooses a lighter burin and opens shallow grooves that arc like the ribs of a shell. Prayer times can borrow these arcs. So can any person whose eyes measure day by work and sheet. Along one edge, he reserves a place for the shadow scale, the tangent lines which the gnomon will use when sun stands high and sharp. People are taller or shorter, walls too, he says, so shadows tell many stories, but the proportion stays polite. The apprentice drills the small pilot hole for the sighting rules pivot right at the disc's heart. He uses a bow drill with a bone handle polished to a softness that invites the thumb. The bowstring sings in a quick whisper as it moves. The drill's metal point bites neatly because the master kissed the spot earlier with a center punch. A thin curl of brass rises and falls away. When the hole is through, the apprentice takes a round brooch and turns it a hair to smooth the throat. He tests with a tapered pin. The fit is content, not tight. They trade places, and the master returns to the reed. Bridges that were only ink must become brass. He saws another window, then with files of three shapes, flat, half round, and square, he dresses each edge until it looks like a line drawn by a calm hand. Where two branches meet, he rounds the inner corner so stress will have nothing to grab in years to come. He has learned to think like time, to remove the tiny hooks where fatigue could one day begin to speak too loudly. The apprentice stirs the black wax again and pushes it into the degree ticks on the back plate, then wipes. The ring of numbers begins to stand as if lit from within. He inlays the calendar letters likewise, leaving the troughs dark and the brass pale. He buffs with chalk on linen small circles that make a cloud. The plate glows, not mirror bright, just enough to please. On a small tray lies the horseshoe clip, the wound, some call it, that will hold the stack to the pin. It has been cut from springy brass and filed to a shape that can pinch and release without forgetting itself. The master tests its arms once, spreading and letting them close against his thumb. They return home faithfully. He laughs a little under his breath, an old habit when tools behave. Now for the rule they alludate. A narrow strip of brass lies ready, longer than the plate's diameter by 2 finger widths. The master marks its center and drills a hole that matches the pin. At each end he files a small window sights for the eye. He chooses to leave one sight square and the other with a V-notch, a matter of preference, like choosing one cup over another for tea. He darkens the edges with a whisper of lamblack rubbed in and wiped away so the eye finds the line quickly against bright metal. The pin itself is a small column with a gentle head. He turns it in a hand drill, smoothing its shank with charcoal and oil until the surface slides through the plates as if they had grown together. The heart, the apprentice says, recalling the word he heard last month. Yes, the master answers. A small heart, but all motion center. He cups it in his palm a moment, and then sets it aside in a tray lined with felt. A bell from the lane counts a baker's hour. The neighbor calls figs in a voice that could sell even stones. The room keeps its softer calendar. The master takes up a scribe and lays out the prayer lines lightly on the back marks that let one read times when the sun's altitude agrees with intention. He cuts them shallow like whispers. The apprentice fetches a reed and inks the names in the margin. Fajr, Dor Asr, Maghrib Osha. Letters are small and respectful. An instrument is not a billboard. They heat the pitch just enough to loosen the reed and lift it free. The back of the open work reveals small burrs where some met brass. The master strokes them away with a scraper so no finger will meet a thorn. He holds the piece against the window light. It looks like a petal fallen from a metal flower, filled with small names that keep their counsel. Assembly waits for tomorrow's steadier hands, but they allow themselves a preview. The tympan engraved earlier with altitude lines for Baghdad's latitude slides onto the mother plate. The rate rests atop, and the pin goes through with a pleasing click. The horseshoe clip kisses the pin's tail and holds, not too tight. The Aladade turns on the back with a hush that makes both men smile. They do not celebrate, they rotate each part once, twice, and put them back on their trays. Tea arrives again, weaker now and just right for late morning. A date splits. Sweetness answers brass. The apprentice writes a short note in the margin of his booklet, names in. Scales cut. Heart drilled. Clip content. The master wipes the bench with a damp cloth and turns it over a finger to feel any grit. None remains. He rests his palm on the plate's face as if blessing a child, and then lifts his hand away. Outside, the lane takes on the warm busy of noon. Inside, quiet builds a little house around the work. Afternoon light folds into the room like a second cloth over the first. The brazier's warmth eases to a hum. The benches keep their scent of brass and gum, familiar as a well-worn sleeve. Today's work is not loud. It is the kind of finishing that turns a good thing quiet and true. The sighting rule returns to the bench. Long and narrow, it lies like a calm reed on the master's palm. He files the edges in slow pulls, then turns the strip and draws the file back again so no burr favors one side. The corners at the windows receive a rounding no thicker than a barley grain, just enough to keep cloth and fingers safe. He takes a strip of leather charged with chalk and drags the rule sides along it until the brass glows like water at dusk. The apprentice seats a tiny pin in each sight, short and bright, one on either flank of the square window so the eye can align edge with edge even in low light. He touches each pin with the finest brush dipped in lamblack, then wipes so a dark ring remains around their heads. The ends look like little eyes now, friendly, alert, helpful. Latitude plates Timpans wait in a neat fan on a tray. Baghdad's is finished, engraved with all mucanters and azimuth. Two others are nearly so, one for a city north, another for a port to the south, where the sea's salt always speaks. The master sets the northern plate in pitch and picks a burin with the smallest bite. He deepens the principal circles where use will trace them in years to come, then crosses them with sky meridians set by calculations settled last night on a scrap of wax tablet. The apprentice adds tiny numerals in the margin altitudes at the edge where the reed's pointers will kiss. He writes them as if speaking to someone who will be a little tired, a little hurried, and grateful for letters that do not misbehave. When the lines are cut, the apprentice warms a pea of blackened wax and feeds it into the grooves. Wipe, brighten, rest. The plate catches the window's light and returns it politely. Burnishing comes next, the work that removes noise. The master wets the brass with a breath of oil and moves a polished agate across the surface in overlapping ellipses. The stone's weight does most of the asking, the hand only guides. Under the agate, microscopic scratches agree to lie down together so the brass can become a single field. In certain angles the plate looks like cloth, in others it vanishes and lets the lines do the talking. The room enjoys this part, for it is only motion and quiet. A thin lacquer waits in a glazed bowl, gum and alcohol, a hint of saffron to keep the brass from darkening too quickly under curious sky. The apprentice wipes a clean pad across the surface in long, even strokes, always past the edge so no ridge grows at the end. The coat is no more than the memory of a coat. It will dry while other tasks speak. The mother plate's back receives the same care. Degrees sit crisp. The calendar ring dries to a soft satin. The shadow scale, the tangent lines, gets a last light kiss of the burin where two figures had seemed to sigh to show themselves. The rule, set over the back, glides and rests without scratch. The pin with its modest head drops into the heart hole by its own weight and waits for the horseshoe clip to say yes. They open the ledger before stepping outside. On the first page of the day's hand, the apprentice writes a line that will learn a date later when the call for prayers steadies the hour. Read finished, timpans for Baghdad, and to more, rule dressed, heart true, waiting for sun. The master smiles at the last two words. Instruments enjoy vanity when it presents itself as patience. Time for trial. The courtyard is a square of stone with a fig tree drawing a slow green on one side and a jar that remembers cool on the other. The lane beyond is not loud at this hour, only footsteps that do not hurry, a low voice selling almonds, a child counting stones. Above, the sky wears a clear blue that scholars might argue about while agreeing to admire. The master carries the mother plate and the chosen timpan for Baghdad. The apprentice carries the wreath on a cloth folded twice. Assembly happens in air and in hand. Timpan seats in the mother, wreath lays over, pin descends, horseshoe clip thinks for a heartbeat, and then grips the pin's tail. The instrument becomes itself. The rule perches on the back and spins a little to show it can. To sight the sun, they do not look at the sun. The rule becomes a guide for shadow. The master holds the astrolabe by the ring so the mother hangs vertical, and the wreath faces in. The apprentice stands where he throws no shade into the experiment. Slowly, the master swivels the back to face the sun while the rule points outward from the plate. He watches the rule's shadow fall upon the degree scale. The shadow comes sharp today, thin as thread. When it shortens no further, he draws the rule down until its edge aligns with the shadow's slender self. He bends at the waist to bring eye level with the rin, and reads the degrees at the mark. 56, he says softly, and then the minutes with a glance, and that small mental subtraction always required by human marks, and 2. He sets the instrument down and lets it rest on his palm. Noon in this season would sit a little higher. The day has not finished climbing. He turns the astrolabe over. On the front, he sets the sun's place along the ecliptic, a small star where scholars agree the sun pretends to be a step along the zodiac band engraved under the rete. He rotates the rete until that star sits on the altitude circle that matches the reading he made. The city under the rete's arches becomes a map of the sky above the fig. The date on the back finds its hour along the unequal scale. The apprentice cross-checks with his smaller table and nods. The instrument breathes the same answer until languages shadow and circle. Gentle commentary can sit here. A first reading is not a proof like a courtroom's. It is a handshake. The instrument says, "This is how I think," and the sky answers, "I agree." There will be finer check stars at night, unknown wall, and known height, but sun and shadow carry the authority of everyday life. The master lifts the astrolabe again and, using the rule now as a sight, peers along its window toward the minaret's top. He notes the angle, then flips the instrument and reads the tangent scale. He computes, quietly and brief, the tower's height given their distance in paces. His number matches the rumor a mason told him last month. Satisfactions come in small packets. Those are sometimes the best kind. They return to the bench as the courtyard grows warmer. The ledger opens its mouth. The apprentice writes, "Sonnet reading agreed with table hour found, tower height checked, rule steady, rate clear." He adds the one remark he has been waiting to earn. Instrument polite. He underlines nothing. Underlining is work for people who mistrust their own hand. The master takes a final look along each edge. He feels the pin with 2 fingers, not to tighten, only to greet. He slides the tympan out and swaps the plate for the northern city. The rete star leaves kiss the lines in a slightly different way. The Alade's shadow falls on numbers that mean an hour shaped by latitude's kindness or refusal. The instrument does not mind. It was made to travel simply by changing what lies beneath. Before they rest the pieces on their trays, a last finish. The ring at the top by which one holds the instrument receives a leather thong. The apprentice rubs the thong with a trace of oil so it will not crack at the first argument with sun. He ties a small flat knot that lies against brass without pride. They swaddle the astrolabe in a square of soft linen and lay it in a wooden case with a lid that slides like a wise drawer. The case is not ornate. It is a house that asks wind and dust to mind their manners. On its underside, the master has burned his house mark with a hot nail, the same nut sign his neighbor prints into jars of honey. Marks speak to markets, but they also speak to future hands that open lids in a room that will smell of brass and books. Tea returns with mint bruised by thumb. They sip and do not talk immediately. Silence belongs to finishing. When words come, they are practical. Tomorrow, fittings for a traveler's strap, the master says. Tonight stars, if the sky agrees. The apprentice nods and turns the page of the ledger so evening can have its place. A small breeze walks through the curtain and forgets to leave. The tool tray is covered with a folded cloth. The brazier is persuaded to rest with its ashes spread thin. The room, pleased with its day, breathes the way brass breathes when fingers leave it alone. Evening agrees to happen. The lane grows kind and narrow. The fig's leaves turn to coins of dusk. A single lamp hangs by the doorway, trimmed short so moths will not feel invited to argue. The wooden case opens, linen folds back, and the instrument comes to the air as if it had been sleeping in a page and now prefers the margin. Night work is different from day work. Voices become fewer, footsteps soften. The city makes a slower kind of sense. The master loops the leather thong over his wrist and lets the astrolabe hang so the mother plate is truly vertical. The apprentice brings a small tripod, not for the instrument, but for the ledger and the clay tablet where he will scratch numbers before ink learns them. He sits both on a low stool. A cup of water waits. Mint leaves lie in it and behave like leaves. The first star they choose is one generous to beginners, bright, not shy of the horizon and old in the company of pointers. Deneb sits where the river of the sky begins to pour. The master sights along the Aladede's square window, keeping the back toward him so the degree rim is honest. He raises the instrument until the star smiles into the notch. His thumb steadies the rule, his other hand pinches the plate's ring. The degree read is quiet, 34 and a touch. The apprentice repeats the number and lays it down on the clay. Then notes the moment by the water clock on the bench inside to beads since lamplighting. They trade places for Altair. The apprentice's cheek leans near the window. He learns to ignore his own breath fogging the brass. He finds the star, draws the rule down until edge meets light, and reads with a care that is neither fear nor pride. 29 and 3. The master hums a little, not a tune, only a syllable of thought, and nods. Numbers alone are only shapes. A handful of them together begins to be a sky. Back to the front. The returns with the soft hush of well-behaved brass. The master places each star pointer on the altitude circle that matches its reading, then glances at the azimuths, the sky meridians, to see if the pattern lives where the city's north should be. He lifts the instrument to the fig's trunk, letting the azimuth line that claims north kiss the bark while his other hand tests the true with a small lodestone needle balanced on a reed, an old trick, not perfect and not needed, but rituals keep hands from growing careless. The agreement is good, not boasting, but the quiet yes they hope for. A small error shows itself where good work prefers to hide. Fomalhaut's leaf is half a hair's breadth to the cheerful side of correct. Not a sin, not even a quarrel, but enough that a sailor with a strict temper might frown. The master marks the leaf's tip with a whisper of chalk. We'll file that shy, he says. He returns inside with the instrument, sets it face down into the pitch warmed only a finger's worth, and with the smallest file teeth like a palm in sand he dresses the leaf toward exact. The apprentice holds a lamp to the side, not in front, so shadows can tell when edges have become true. They blacken the name again and wipe. The star returns to its place the way a thread returns to a needle's eye on the third try. A visitor ives with a knot that is not a knot to fingertips against the doorpost. He is a scholar known to the shop, a man whose turban stays tiddier than his notes. He carries a narrow roll bound with blue string. The master sets the file aside. The scholar bows in the manner of someone who has remembered to eat. He unrolls a chart that smells faintly of camphor and travel and says, with a politeness that ignores excitement, A friend brings a problem from Basra. A muezzin's line of sight is blocked by a taller roof. He needs the time when the sun reaches a certain altitude above the river wall instead of watching the sun directly. The wall is known 5 men tall at this point, and not ashamed to stand there. Could your instrument speak to him? The master smiles at the question as at a child who has asked the very thing a teacher hoped for. Yes, he says, if he knows his distance from the wall and can count a shadow, or if he can measure the angle to the wall's crown. Either way, altitude is a polite guest. It will sit where we ask it. They go out again to the courtyard. The master sets the Eldade to a fixed angle on the back one the scholar names from his roll. He locks his thumb there a moment, then flips to the front and turns the reed until the sun's place along the ecliptic lies on that altitude circle for this hour. He notes the unequal hour against the scale. He hands the instrument to the scholar, who holds it with the cautious affection given to a sleeping infant from a neighbor's house. The scholar nods twice, his mind in Basra seeing the wall, the roof, the river, a line of light, the time. He smiles the smile that begins in the eyes and takes a while to arrive anywhere else. They sit on the bench. The apprentice brings dates that have learned to be patient. The scholar yawns into his sleeve with apology, and then asks for a second problem because problems travel together. A traveler wants to know when, by star, to turn his camel path a little east to find the well-spare of wind. He cannot read long tables without falling asleep on them. He can read an instrument between yawns. The master inclines his head. He lays the northern tympan under the reed and choose how to set the night by a bright star's hour-angle pointer from star to the northern axis. Then read where that line crosses the hour circle marked for night. It will not sing you poetry, the master says, but it will keep your thirst from writing bad verse. They return to calibration. Vega now Arcturus after Suel if the horizon's breath allows. Each sighting becomes a line in the ledger, star, reading, correction if any, note about haze or neighbor's laundry rope lifted obligingly out of the sight. A thin cloud tests their patience, then moves on to trouble someone else's astronomy. A dog coughs twice as if reminding them that earthly business remains. The fig cools and holds the day's heat like a secret. The apprentice writes with the care of someone whose letters will be read by people who have not met him. Vega, 47 slight haze, leaf true, Arcturus, 19 1/2 azimuth a hair shy, filed bridge, ray blackened. He presses blotting paper, lifts it, and even the block looks content. He adds the shop mark at the margin, a simple knot drawn into stroke so that any page torn away one day will still know where it lived. They test the Eldade's sights against a straight wall by lamplight to see if windows align. A small mismatch whispers from the square end. The apprentice feels a prick of shame, and then remembers to trade shame for work. He backs the pin a quarter turn, lifts the rule, and with a fingernail's worth of file, kisses the inside of the window. The rule returns, the wall's top edge slips into the notch-like thread to a loom. The master says nothing, which is a good word in that language. Night is honest now. The sky knew the horizon has stopped pretending to be blue. The lamp at the door takes its small breath. They assemble the instrument with the Baghdad plate and ask one more kindness of the stars. Deneb agrees, Altair agrees, Fomalhaut, newly polite, agrees in its new shoes. The ledger opens once more. The apprentice writes a short line that will please him later when he happens to see it. Sky and circle shook hands. The scholar rises with thanks and leaves a gift he hid poorly, the little roll of blue string he used to tie his chart. For bindings, he says. The master tucks it into a tray where useful small things go to wait. The visitor's sandals tap the lane, then become other people's business. Inside, they set the instrument on a folded cloth and let it cool its thoughts. The master draws the wooden catalogue from the shelf, a thin book of the shop's work, each instrumental line of its own. He sharpens the reed with 3 gentle slices. He writes in a hand that does not rush. Astrolabe brass, reed of open leaf, tympans X3 Baghdad, North City, Southern Port, back with degrees, calendar, shadow scale, rule square and V, heart true, clip spring sound, tested by sun and for stars, correction made at formaldehyde leaf, offered with strap and case. He leaves a space for the customer's name and for the price when both parties have earned it. The brazier sighs. The fig outside lets go 1 leaf without ceremony. The instrument's brass holds a night cool that will make morning pleasant when hands first touch it. The master covers it with linen again and ties the case with a flat knot that knows its job. They drink the last of the water, which now tastes more of mint than of clay. The apprentice closes the ledger, smooths the page with his palm, and sets a weight on it so the reed shine will not raise the corners. Tomorrow will be 4 straps and for teaching 1 more pair of hands how to ask the sky polite questions. Morning opens its hand over the lane. The fig tree trades shadows for birds. The workshop smells of swept dust and the first pinch of tea. On the bench, the wooden case waits with its linen-wrapped brass. Today is for small kindnesses, fittings, and farewells, and for teaching a new hand to ask quiet questions of the sky. The traveler arrives as the city's voices turn from murmur to day. His robe is simple, its hem speaking of roads. A leather bag sits across his chest, scuffed where a bull rides. He greets the room with the respectful voice of someone who earns long miles 1 patient step at a time. He lays down 2 dates and a twist of dried limes, not payment, only hello. The master answers with tea and invites him to sit on the low mat where the light falls evenly. They begin with the strap. The apprentice brings a length of leather cut from a calm part of the hide, not the belly, not the neck, so it will hang without remembering old shapes. He rubs oil into it with a linen square until the leather darkens like wet earth, and then forgets the wet. He measures from the traveler's shoulder to his palm, and marks the strap with a bone awl. 2 slots are cut for brass sliders that will let the length change when a coat is worn or left on a peg. The strap threads through the ring at the Astrolabe's head and returns to meet itself in a flat knot that lies without pride on the chest. The knot is the kind that can be untied even by cold fingers at dawn. Now the case. The wooden sleeve's lid slides with a friendly friction that keeps out dust and arguments. The master lines it with a folded felt dyed the faded blue of old sky. He tests the fit with the instrument wrapped lightly in linen, snug, but not a vice. A loop of cord passes through 2 drilled holes and ties in a simple bow so even a sleepy hand will not fight it. The apprentice presses the shop mark into a warm blob of beeswax on the case's side seal, enough for a market and a reminder for a road. The lesson begins indoors, where words can practice before light asks for proof. The master unwraps the astrolabe and lays its pieces in a small constellation on the bench. Mother tympans, Read pin and clip rule. He names each part and then moves it into place, not quickly, not as theater, but as a rhythm. He has the traveler repeat the assembly twice, then once with eyes half closed, to learn by feel which side of the tympan faces up the tiny scratch, the faint notch, the way the circle's numbers lean. If you can do it in the dark, the master says, you will do it in wind. They step into the courtyard where the fig draws an even shade. The master asks the traveler to hang the instrument by its ring and feel when the mother plate is truly vertical. Let your wrist be a hinge, he says. The traveler finds his steadiness. He lifts the alidade and learns to keep his breath off the brass. They sight a distant roof line first earth before sky, so the learns to align the square window without squinting. The rule's shadow on the degree rim becomes a comfortable friend. Sunwork comes next. The master does not permit direct gazing. The rule's shadow has better manners. The traveler rotates his body like a slow door until shadow thins and rests against the rule's edge. He bends and reads, lips shaping numbers, fingers walking the rim to the mark. 48, he says, and then adds a small fraction with pleasure, not from showing off, but from recognizing that the world likes decimals, even when people pretend they do not. The master nods. Set the sun's place, he says, and watches the traveler place the reek's little star on the proper notch of the zodiac. The reek moves with a sound that could almost be a purr. Now read your hour, the master says, and the rule swings to the unequal scale where daylight lengths change their minds with the season. The traveler reads again, slower, sure. The answer agrees with a shadow on the courtyard wall that all three have known for years. A short walk to the lane gives them a minaret's clean line. The traveler sights it, reads the degree, flips the instrument, and consults the tangent scale. He measures paces back to the door and multiplies by the proportion his thumb now knows. Height becomes number. Number becomes a friendly thing that will help with wells, dunes, and a caravan's pride in estimating without quarreling. They return to the bench for night practice written in daytime words. The master places the northern tympan and points to Deneb's leaf, then traces with his finger the circle that will carry the night's time. The traveler repeats the motions on the empty air above the plate. When you see it, the master says, you only have to remember the feeling you practiced now. The traveler smiles, a little shy as people do when a path that looked like mathematics turns out to be a sequence of touch and breath. Payment comes without bargaining. The traveler empties a small pouch and pours its quiet onto the bench, silver dirhams rubbed smooth, a few bright copper coins, and the respectful weight of a tiny gold dinar. The master counts with fingertips and then pushes back to coppers. You brought lines, he says. They both pretend this is arithmetic. The apprentice opens the catalogue and writes the customer's name in a careful hand, then adds the price with a modest flourish. He draws the house knot and a tiny star beside the line because he is to please not to, and because joy belongs in ledgers as much as numbers do. The master ties the strap's tail so it will not flap on a camel. He sets the instrument in its case and then takes it out again because leaving without one last check never made a tool better. He resets the pin and clip, hears the soft click, and smiles a small smile that has become his signature on finished work. He hands the case to the traveler with both palms the way one passes a bowl of water in summer. Farewell is brief. Use your shadow, the master says. Trust the line. The traveler bows over the case, tucks it under his arm, and walks into the lane where a donkey decides to move exactly then, saving pride for another time. The leather strap rides his shoulder, the wooden sleeve rests against his ribs like a second heart. The workshop breathes out. The brazier is persuaded to forget its heat. Tools return to their trays with the quiet of animals finding their stalls. The apprentice sweeps filings into a small jar. Tomorrow they will be treated to a caster who loves to melt yesterday's fragments into a new beginning. The master wipes the bench with a damp cloth and hangs the cloth on its peg. He sits a moment without doing anything and lets the room become still enough to hear the fig's smallest leaf speak. Gentle commentary can rest here, instruments travel, but shops remain. And Astrolabe's lines will learn other skies, other prayers, other roofs. The bench, the burin, the file, these will welcome the next circle and the next careful hand. Work continues not as noise, but as a river that moves by being the same and not the same. The catalogue closes with a friendly thump. The house mark on the case dries to a soft firmness. The afternoon light draws a square on the floor and begins to climb the wall. In the alley, someone sells rope and calls it strong enough for wind. As the brass disc cools back to quiet and the leather strap learns a shoulder, we climb a narrow stair above a coral stone lane, into a shade loft where canvas stretches like a pale sea and palm fiber twine finds its rhythm in the hands of a sailmaker. Dawn lifts like a lid, not fast, not slow, just certain. In the courtyard of the press, stone keeps yesterday's cool while the lamps keep a small circle of warmth. The smell is leaf and clean dust, with a round note of ripe fruit that has slept under woven baskets. A grooved millstone stands ready by its circular path. Its axle wears a shine where hands have turned and coaxed and turned again through many seasons. A boy arrives first because boys arrive early when work has a quiet rhythm. He carries a fig twig to skim leaves and a small jar of water. He looks at the two basins, one for crushing, one for pressing, and touches their rims with a quick palm as if greeting old friends. A clay lamp murmurs on a bench. He pinches the soot from its lip so the flame will stay modest. A swallow draws a thin line through the white morning and then decides the air is still too cool for serious flying. Others come with baskets loop on their arms. Linen bolts at waists, sandals that remember dust. They speak softly, the way people speak in a room that already knows how to work. The olives roll from woven trays into a rinse bowl. The boy dips his twig and pulls floating leaves to the side in patient strokes, the way you might comb hair that has learned a few knots. A shallow sieve lifts and rests, lifts and rests. The grooved stone begins to turn. One man lays his shoulder to the oak lever, another guides the feed. Olives fall into the stone's slow path and accept their fate with a friendly sigh. Under the stone, fruit becomes paste that goes like dark jade. A wooden rake with a flat tongue gathers the paste into a low bowl, and the bowl's edge wears a little chip from other mornings. Near the pressing basin, mats wait in a tidy pile, woven discs of reed and palm fiber, thick as a thumb, rough as a field path. A woman spreads the first mat on the shallow platform and smooths it with the heel of her hand. She ladles paste in a circle, leaving a margin as steady as a careful breath, then lays a second mat on top and presses its edges to meet the one below. A stack begins, mat, paste, the quiet architecture of patience. A rope waits beside the beam. The rope smells of sea air and oil. It has learned both. It coils in loops that lie flat, a sign of good rope and a person who respects it. The beam itself sleeps on its upright with a wedge to hold it at rest. Someone removes the wedge and the beam lowers with a hello, not a complaint. A wooden screw with a generous thread stands above the stack. It does not know the word hurry. The crank bar turns. Fibers say yes. The stack settles by a whisper. A slower settling follows, as if the mats remembered how to give and then decided to give a little more. Between mats, a thin line appears. Not water, not quite gold. It is both, what the tree held in light, now choosing to be a liquid. It finds the shallow spout at the basin's edge and gathers in a waiting bowl that shows its first green mirror. A woman brings a pinch of salt in a tiny cup. Not for the oil, not now, but for the bread that will follow the first tasting. The bread waits under a cloth stamped with a simple pattern of squares, each square a little crooked, and all the more human for it. A wheel of fresh cheese sits beside the cloth, still damp at the edges. Bees drift near the fig leaves in the rinse bowl, and then think better of it. In a corner, a small jar stands half full of clean water. A strip of wool floats in it like a little cloud. When the beam has pressed a while, the boy dips his fingers and wets the edge of one mat, letting the water talk to the paste. Water teaches oil where to gather. The foreman nods, not a command, more a teaching that has been understood so many times it needs no language. While the beam works, there is other work. A woman rubs tallow into the hinge of a door that sticks in damp weather. A man checks the clay jugs in the storage room, lined along a low wall. Their mouths wear clean linen plugs tied with cord, ready to receive the season. He tips one to his ear and listens for the hollow sound of emptiness. He smiles because emptiness is exactly what it should be today. The millstone turns again. The pace is never a march, it is a footpath. Someone hums a line from a harvest song that has lost most of its words and kept all of its comfort. A little girl too young to lift, old enough to carry news arrives with a small jar of thyme. She sets it on the bench because thyme keeps flies polite, and also because the smell pleases everyone who works with their hands. From time to time, the beam rests so the mats can breathe, and the paste can share more of itself without sulking. The foreman loosens the screw half a turn, lifts the wedge, and sets it again. He runs a fingertip under the spout and looks at the color. Pale, with a shy green that will deepen after the sediment settles. He knows these things the way he knows when sandals will last one more month. Gentle commentary belongs here. In many old presses, the earliest oil the free run was prized. Gravity and patience did the first part of the work before heavier pressure came. It may seem unusual today to pause and let tools rest, but rest teaches quality. The first thread carries the grove's best breath. The boy brings a shallow saucer with a lip. He dips, skims, and offers it to the oldest pair of hands. The elderly man touches a fingertip to the surface, rubs thumb to finger, then lifts both to his nose. He says nothing, which is its own blessing. The saucer returns to the bench. No one drinks yet. The oil needs a moment to settle its thoughts. Outside the courtyard wall, cartwheels begin their far, steady talk. A donkey chooses a pace. Olive leaves whisper in a wind that did not exist a minute ago. The lamps do not flicker. A swallow, The one from earlier decides now is the time and writes a larger curve across the sky that has turned from stone to linen. They stack one more set of mats. The beam comes down with its gentle authority, and the bowl grows a little lake. The boy skims to floating specks with a reed, proud of his eye. The foreman unties a cord and measures a jug's mouth with the span between thumb and little finger. The span is satisfied. The jug will suit the day. Bread appears on the bench. Someone tears a piece and presses one face to the oil seen in the saucer, not to eat now, only to see how the oil folds into the crumb. It folds gladly. The piece returns to the cloth. Eating waits for the moment of rest that honors work. If you listen closely now, you can hear 3 layers at once. The press breathing through wood and rope, a slow drip counting itself at the spout, and the faint scratch of a broom gathering chalk dust into a neat, humble heel. This is what a harvest morning sounds like when the tree's silver leaves have become a simple, shining answer. Mid-morning begins as a change in color rather than time. The light in the courtyard grows honey-soft, and the stone floor remembers warmth. The press has found its comfortable rhythm turn, gather, stacked press, rest like a long breath that repeats without instruction. They loosen the screw with a slow half-turn. Rope sighs. The foreman lifts the wedge just enough so the beam lifts a finger's breadth, and the stack relaxes as if grateful. 2 people slide their palms under the uppermost mat, lift it as a pair, and turn it end over end with a small, practiced pivot. The paste darkens where air touches it. Turning encourages it to share more of its light. The second mat follows, then the third rotation without hurry, each disc set down true to the circle below. The boy watches their hands, then places his palms, copies the angle, and learns to carry weight in the heel of the hand, not the fingertips. A shallow copper ladle rests in the bowl at the spout. Its lip is thin and friendly to surfaces. The woman who minds the bowl skims the top with the stillness of a pond on a windless day. She draws up to thumb's worth of pale oil and lets the heavier leaf water slide back. The ladle's thin line goes into a settling jar, small, wide-mouthed clay vessel where liquid can separate without complaint. A ring of warm sunlight climbs the jar's side and brightens the green within. On a low table, clean jugs wait. Their bellies are rounded, their handles wear a thumb's hollow that fits almost any hand. Each mouth is dressed with a linen square, ready to be tied later. A reed pen, dipped in thin soot ink, has already written marks on their shoulders, grove name, day count, and a simple knot-like sign that belongs to this household. The ink dries in a temper that does not smudge. The mat stack grows again, mat paste, mat until the beam is asked to speak once more. The rope turns around the heavy windlass, and fibers lift a whisper out of themselves. The screw comes down steady. The wooden thread hums with the same note it has always liked. Between the mats, light gathers and chooses a path. At the spout, drops learn to become a stream. The bowl fills, and the copper lip announces its small tasks again: skim, pour, settle. The boy tends the rinse bowl nearby. He knows the water's moods. When it clouds, he tips it along the ramp to a trough that leads to a patch of soil eager for anything the press gives. He adds fresh water from a jar and brings the surface back to a clear green tint. His fig twig gathers leaves with careful strokes. He lifts a stray insect with the twig's tip and allows it to find air and decide its next plan. Work and kindness do not compete here. At the edge of the courtyard, a clay brazier holds coals the color of pomegranate seeds. A small pot sits above them with barley simmering in water touched by thyme. The smell is round and calm. A woman turns the pot with a folded cloth and adds a ribbon of oil from a shell spoon. The surface gleams, and the grains answer by loosening like polite guests. Beside the pot, a small bowl holds olives from last year's jars deep, wrinkled, full of sun that was once a different year's sky. The first settling jar clears enough to decant. The foreman lifts it with 2 hands and tips the top layer into a clean jug, stopping before the heavier water at the bottom wakes and follows. He reads the fall of the liquid by its line. Oil leaves the lip like silk, water clings like a shy friend. He wipes the jug's rim with a strip of linen and sets it on the shaded shelf where cool stone keeps new brightness from acting rashly. A plug of linen, twisted into a gentle cone, settles in the mouth and is tied with cord in a flat knot that does not pinch. A brief pause greets the first sealed jug. Not ceremony, recognition. Work has turned into keeping. The woman who skims the bowl rests her ladle. The man at the windlass leans, his forearm on the beam. The boy stands quite still because stillness suits this moment. The oldest pair of hands lifts the jug and sets it back down with the care given to a sleeping child. He nods, and the day enters another quieter gear. They eat where they stand, not from haste but from a habit that keeps hands near tools. The cloth comes off the bread. It breaks with a sound that small birds understand. A cup holds salt, fingertips visit, then touch bread, then touch oil in the saucer, and taste. The cheese offers its fresh milk to the day. A few olives harsh, in the best way remind the tongue what time can do. Water passes in a small line of cups. Clay warms to hand, cools the lip, asks nothing. After the mouth knows this, work feels different. The beam's groan becomes companionable. The rope feels less like cord and more like a slow song in palm and shoulder. The boy steals a glance at the jug shelf and counts with his lips, not aloud. 1 jug wearing a new cord. Another will join it before the next rest. Gentle commentary belongs here. Presses like this often worked in rounds, freer on first, then a firmer press, sometimes a third under heavier weight. The earliest oil was mild and bright, later rounds had more assertive character. Households kept each in its place, lamps, cooking offerings, each oil with a destiny that matched its nature. Gnats need tending too. A woman lifts one that has finished its turn in the stack, carries it to the rinse trough, and pours warm water along its weave. She presses with the flat of her fingers so paste loosens without tearing fiber. A short brush stiff that kindly coaxes the last clinging specks free. The mat dries on a line strung between posts, sun and air making it ready for again. Woven work shows it's wet, and then gives it back. By afternoon, those discs will feel almost new, and yet they will keep the memory that makes them strong. A boy from a nearby house trots in with a jug of fresh water and a question about the donkey's tether. He finds the answer in a nod and leaves a fig for the skimmer as payment for attention. The fig rests on the bench and emits the quiet perfume of fruit that has nothing to prove. The millstone path receives new fruit. The man who guides the feed lifts handfuls with an easy, circular motion from basket to groove. He removes a stray twig because twigs push back, and the stone prefers steady dialogue. The paste this time shines a little darker, the difference a grove makes. A slope's tilt, the way a tree remembered wind last month. The rake carries it to the bowl, and the bowl's lip begins its little work again. Near the door, a girl sweeps chalk dust toward a basket. The broom's twigs make a sound like a whisper being braided. Her sweep reveals small scuffs where sandals turned yesterday. She pauses at a patch where two lines cross and traces the crossing with the tip of the broom as if reading a letter no one wrote but everyone understands. She does not linger. Dust becomes small hill, then hill becomes basket, then basket becomes clean threshold. The sun makes its way without needing a witness. The courtyard wall shoulders shadows that slide, then soften, then gather their edges to the wall's foot. The lamps have gone out, their wicks trimmed and saved. A swallow writes bolder lines now. The fig twig stands in the rinse bowl like a little mast. The bean is asked to lower once more for the round that will close the morning. They set one last pair of mats for this portion of the day and draw the screw down. The bowl fills with a steady light. The skimmer's hand remains unhurried. The decanter learns again the shape of patience. Another jug accepts its share of the grove and receives its linen cone and cord. The foreman ties the knot in a way that can be untied when the day comes, but not by accident. He presses the knot with his thumbnail to show it understands. The small meal's last crust goes to a visitor, the cat who owns the wall. It refuses bread and accepts a glance instead. Everyone returns to their places. The beam breathes, the floor warms. A thin line of shade in the doorway marks the hour better than any mark on clay. Work continues without insistence. Noon thinks about arriving before it does. The courtyard color shifts toward the pail of baked bread. The press has earned a pause that is not idleness, only a change of task. The foreman touches the rim of the settling jar with the back of his knuckle and reads temperature the way some people read weather. Warm enough to coax separation, not so warm as to hurry flavor away. Clarifying begins with quiet hands. A woman lifts the first small jar of settled oil and tilts it toward a funnel made of fired clay, its mouth lined with a clean linen cone. The cloth is woven with a modest openness tight enough to restrain seed dust, loose enough to let the grove pass through. Oil leaves the jar in a sheet, not a rope, and the sheet folds into the funnel with a docile curve. Below, a pale-bellied amphora waits, its neck narrow, its shoulders generous. The amphora has been rinsed with warm water, then with a breath of last year's oil so this year will feel expected. At the bottom of the settling jar, a darker line wakes and thickens, the heavier leaf water and tiny fruit solids that would cloud the jug if allowed to travel. The woman stops a heartbeat before that line climbs, sets the jar upright, and lets the heavy stay with its own kind. She pours the final thumb of clear oil into a little dish that holds the day's tastes, a record not written, but sipped and remembered. The linen cone in the funnel receives a pinch of fresh ash from the hearth, an old trick to gather fine nukiness. The oil understands and brightens a fraction more as it slips into the amphora's cool. Gentle commentary fits here. Many households clarified in step settle, decant, strain through cloth, sometimes repeat after a night's rest. It may seem tedious, but stillness is a tool. In times before glass was common, they all learned to judge clarity by the way light lived in clay. 2 amphorae stand ready for marking. A boy kneels beside them with a reed pen and a dish of thin black. He writes the house sign first, a not like mark practiced on a shirt until it became a second nature. Below it, he draws a simple olive twig with the leaves, then makes a dot for the grove's terrace and another dot for the day count since the new moon. His hand moves slowly. Ink prefers unhurried decisions on porous clay. When he finishes, he blows once, not to dry the ink. A breath is too small for that, but because the gesture pleases him and belongs to the work. Nearby, a small furnace gives a friendly purr. It is no large kiln, only a clay bell set over coals that the brazier keeps alive. Inside, a shallow pan of water waits for its warm purpose, washing mats, softening linen plugs, and coaxing wax to a polite melt for seals. A woman feeds the furnace with chips of dry olive wood and a pinch of grapevine prunings. The smoke smells like two seasons talking to each other. She stirs the coals with an iron pick until the glow evens, then sets a second pan upon the rim, a low bowl with beeswax that will later soften into answerable amber. In the shade of the wall, mats drip from their rinse and grow light by degrees. A girl checks the warp with two thumbs and spreads a strand that dreamed of twisting. She taps the edge against the post to shake loose what water would rather keep, then props the disc at an angle so air can walk both faces. A breeze finds the courtyard and thinks it invented cool. It did not. The stone invented cool, the shade improved it, and the breeze enjoys the credit. The foreman chooses a moment to let the bean nap. The wedge goes in. The rope unwinds a hand, and the screw remembers that stillness is also work. People unbend backs without drama. The boy brings a jug of water from the outer cistern, its clay sweating a dark ring around its waist. He pours a little into 3 shallow cups and sets them where hands can find them, then wipes a bead from the jug's lip with the corner of his tunic because carefulness tastes like good manners. The small mid-noon errand calls for 2, one to carry, one to see. They will go to the grove's lower terrace to coax a last basket from trees that the morning forgot and to check the net that kept fruit from learning to roll too far. The older man ties on a hat woven of palm strips, wide-brimmed and shyly frayed. The boy takes the emptied basket with its willow handle polished by other hands. They walk out the gate, sandals counting the hard patches and soft patches of the path without making a lesson of it. In the grove, light becomes a different subject. Leaves flash silver, then green, then silver again, a slow applause above the terraced earth. The older man studies the ground under a knot of branches and nods toward 3 olives that learn to hide in plain sight. The boy crouches and picks them with thumb and 2 fingers, not squeezing, not bruising, only asking. He empties his hand into the basket and straightens a strap on the net where it preferred not to obey. A cicada begins a string and then remembers to pause between phrases. Stones hold their heat like old advice. They pause at the cistern under the fig and take 2 swallows each from a gourd that lives there. The fig's smell makes the water taste greener than it is. On the way back, the boy stoops to lift a fallen twig for the skimming bowl fig again, supple, good for persuading leaves to regret their choices. The older man taps the terrace wall with his knuckles. The wall answers his tap with a sound that says the winter rains have not bullied it this year. He nods to the wall, which is a sort of conversation. Behind them, the courtyard accepts their return with a shade that has shifted a hand. The furnace's beeswax now shines like small honey captured in a shallow lake. The woman rolls a bit between fingers to test softness, It yields like bread dough at first rest. She pinches off a walnut's worth and sets it in a little clay cup near the amphory. Clarifying continues. A second settling jar prepares to give up its top. The funnel's linen, now changed for a fresh piece, hangs its predecessor on a line to dry before washing. The oil it kept will make even old cloth feel like it remembers kindness. The amphora's shoulder takes light differently now, less through mooring. If this were a market day, the amphora would wear a wooden tag and a price, but today is a house day. The only tag is the house sign the boy inked, and the knot of cord that will close the mouth. The foreman walks his palm along the beam to the screw, and lays the back of his hand under the thread to feel the heat hidden there. Warm, not hot. Wood that works still stays polite if you keep it oiled and honest. He lifts a small pot from a shelf, olive oil thickened with ashes, and a finger of resin, and with a cloth the color of work, he rubs a breath along the thread. The scent is part forest, part hearth. The wooden spiral thanks him by not squeaking. A woman carries a basket of fresh olive leaves to the goat's pen, for later goats enjoy the parts that do not become oil. She leaves a handful under the shade of the arch where a cat naps with a paw over its nose. The cat lifts an ear to accept the idea and returns to practicing rest. The furnace water has reached its temper. The mat washer dips the corner of each disc and presses with knuckles, coaxing out what paste still loves the weave. She rinses the few stubborn places with a thin stream from a jug warmed at the edge of the coals. Steam rises in small, polite ghosts and disappears into the shade's mouth. When she hangs the last mat, her palms smell of fiber and a little smoke. She rubs them together as if applauding the mat for being a simple, useful thing. Lunch is modest and comes to the work, not the other way around. A clay plate holds barley with thyme and 2 curls of cheese, another holds cucumbers that remember night water. 4 olives sit like full stops. There is oil in a dish no larger than a pond. A narrow sprig of wild fennel pretends to be a garnish and then becomes part of the meal. They eat slowly, not from scarcity but because chewing is also a kind of rest. Conversation stays small, a remark about a cracked jug unearthed behind the storage wall, a memory of an old tree that used to give bitter fruit until someone learned to prune it in a new shape. After food, the taste of a fig agrees to finish senses. Teeth accept seeds and do not complain. The boy wipes the bench with a dampened cloth and hangs the cloth on a peg where air will keep it honest. The sun pulls the courtyard's shadow edge forward until it kisses the press's foot. That is the sign to draw the beam down again and ask the mats for their afternoon story. Before the crank turns, the foreman fetches a little clay seal from a wooden tray. It bears the house's knot sign carved in shallow lines. He softens a thumb of beeswax in the warm pan and works it into a roll. When the next amphora is filled, and its linen plug tied with a flat knot, he will press the seal into the bead of wax around the cord so the knot can tell if anyone tries to be curious before supper. Wax is not a lock, only a reminder. Reminders are often enough in places where everyone knows everyone's grandmother. Wine stirs the thyme that hangs to dry near the doorway and moves its small shadows across the floor. The millstone waits without boredom. Stones do not rush, and so never tire. The rope's coils lie ready, their loops are open hands. The foreman places his palm on the beam and feels the press as a living thing, wood, fiber, water, and light choosing to become something else. He glances to the shelf of marked amphorae, to the furnace with its gentle lake of wax, to the clean mats, to the boy holding the fig twig like a standard. Everything is in its place. Noon has arrived, but quietly, like a guest who knows which chair is theirs. Afternoon arrives with a small tilt in the shade and a hint of resin in the air. The mats, dry and obedient, come back to the basin in a neat armful. The bean wakes from its nap without complaint. The rope coils and roll like calm snakes. Everyone knows this tempo. Afternoon pressing asks a little more from the fruit, not rudely, only firmly. A second run begins. Pace goes to fresh mats slightly thicker now because the fruit has told its first story and will need encouragement for the rest. The stack grows to waist height, mat on mat, edges aligned by thumb and eye. The screw lowers by quarter turns, the windlass takes its modest strain. The wood speaks in low vowels. Between the mats a deeper, greener oil appears, slower, thoughtful, carrying a fuller memory of leaf and stone. The copper ladle changes hands. The afternoon skimmer has a steady wrist and a habit of breathing out before lifting. He tilts the ladle just enough to skim brightness and leave heaviness. The bowl refills. The settling jars line up like round-bellied listeners. Oil streams, then rests, then decides where to live next, stop for keeping, bottom for patience, and feeding the lamp or the hearth when the time is right. On the bench, the funnel waits with a new linen cone tighter woven for this richer press. The woman sprinkles a whisper of ash into the cloth and smooths it with 2 fingers. The ash disappears, the cloth remembers. She sets the funnel in a younger amphora with a clean, narrow neck. When the second run oil passes, it thickens in the linen by a thought, then clears, then deepens to a shy gold green that looks like a grove just before rain. Light in clay behaves kindly, no glare, only an inner glow. The boy brings the beeswax cup, warm and fragrant. He rolls a thin snake of wax between his palms, lays it around the amphora's knob, and presses it lightly so it waits without sagging. A linen plug settles, a cord wraps, the knot lies flat and clever. The foreman warms the seal on the pan's rim, not hot, just friendly, and sets the little house sign into the wax. The sign lifts clean. The wax holds a neat memory. A thumb smooths the edge. The amphora joins its kin on the shelf, shoulder to shoulder. Gentle commentary belongs here. Second-run oils were prized for cooking and keeping. They carried more of the fruit's heart. Households often kept the earliest thread for anointing or for the first taste with bread, while the steady afternoon work filled jars that would light winter and flavor stews. The press was not only a tool, it was a calendar written in liquid, a pause for tending. The screw receives another breath of the resin oil that keeps wooden threads content. The rope gets a new half turn around the windlass where likes to settle, changing the bite so fibers do not grow old before their time. A small splinter lifts from the beam. The foreman strokes it down with the back of a knife and a thumb. He hums, not for the beam, but perhaps because humming keeps hands honest. Outside the gate, the day hums too. A cart passes with reeds stacked like the spines of a quiet animal. A woman goes by with a jar balanced on her hip. She carries the posture of someone who trusts her bones. A dog chooses the shade and resists the impulse to comment on anything. Inside, the press continues its simple grammar: pressure, patience, release. The furnace water is changed for fresh. Warmth returns to a polite simmer. Mats that serve the second run go by turns to the rinse and return to the line. A girl scrubs the basin's lip with a twist of wool dipped in warm water, then dries it with a square of linen that smells of sun. She takes pride in edges store grace. A visitor from the next courtyard steps in with a greeting and a small clay cup. He has come for a spoon of lamp oil for his father's evening reading. He waits by the door until nods find him. The foreman lifts the shallow saucer that holds the free run. He tips 2 spoonfuls into the visitor's cup and wipes the lip with the corner of a cloth. The visitor ties a scrap of linen over the cup and thanks the house in a quiet way. He leaves a nut of resin on the bench exchange folded into courtesy and slips away. The stack lowers as oil gives itself. The wedge returns, the screw rises a finger's worth. The mats are turned once more. Paste that liked the middle now learns to meet the edge. Someone brings a bowl of warm water to tip along the stack's crown. The warmth persuades without scolding. The beam descends again, and the afternoon's veins of green thread down like tiny streams finding their creek. When the amphory for cooking are 3 and the one for lamps is nearly satisfied, the foreman declares the press's strong work done for today. There will be a gentle third pressing later, perhaps tomorrow, with warm water speaking kindly to what remains, but now the courtyard turns to keeping and carrying. 2 people wipe the amphory with cloths dampened at the furnace pan. A sheen lifts the last dust. The boy counts by tapping shoulders with his flat hand 1, 2, 3, and the lamp jar makes 4. The inked signs have dried to a soft brown. The wax has set enough to wear touch without smearing. The cord's ends are tucked under themselves like good sleepers. The cool room waits behind a thick door that keeps out heat the way calm keeps out hurry. Its floor is hard earth a little lower than the courtyard, stamped smooth by many careful feet. Shelves of stone run along the walls. The air smells of clay and last year's light fade, but loyal. The foreman lifts an amphora by its shoulders. Another person supports the base with both palms. They go down the 2 steps, slow and square. The jar meets the shelf with a sound like a hand closing softly. They carry the second jar, then the third, and place them so air can walk between their sides. Cool is not cold here. It is breath that does not burn. A small flat stone leans at the end of the shelf. On it sits a dish of dry thon. It is a habitude to persuade damp to stay polite. A spider has drawn a small angle in the corner. The web stays and keeps the room from feeling empty. Back in the courtyard, the lamp jar remains for a moment. The foreman takes a thin reed and dips it, testing how cleanly the oil leaves the reed and how it smells on skin. The answer is good. The jar receives its linen and wax, its cord and sign. It will not go to the cool room yet. It is needed for a small walk. Late afternoon light makes the courtyard sweeter than it was at noon. The millstone path is brushed. The rope is coiled back into its circle. The screw rests with the wedge set snug. Mats lean in a tidy choir. The furnace coals are spread to thinness and covered with a pan to dye well. The boy rinses his fig twig and leaves it in the bowl like a mast in a small, sleeping boat. 2 people prepare for the errand to the shrine. One carries the lamp jar, the other takes a shallow cup, a reed spoon, and a spray of olive leaves. They walk the lane in sandals that know the route. The lane's dust lifts just enough to say that feet matter. Houses lean in with their walls, balconies offer shade without speech. A child on a threshold counts pebbles and pauses to watch the jar go by as if it told a story she already likes. The shrine is small and close, a low stone with a carved hollow, a niche with a modest clay figure, a cluster of smooth pebbles that have gathered patience from many pockets. No crowd, no witness needed. They set the jar down and uncork the linen cone. The reed spoon lifts a small shining circle and lays it in the hollow. The oil settles into the carved bowl with a quiet that is almost a sound. A sprig of leaves follows, not to float forever, only to kiss the surface and rest on the stone. One person touches the stone with 3 fingertips, and then touches forehead and chest because hands like to remember where they have been. Gentle commentary can sit here. Offerings of first oil were less about demand and more about thanks to tree and rain and hand and luck. It was an agreement with time. Take what you need, keep what you must, remember what gave. They cork the jar, tie its cord, and walk home with shadows a hand longer. Along the lane, a neighbor in a doorway lifts a bowl of water in greeting. They nod and keep their small silence. A donkey answers a bell with a plain look. A breeze finds the thing drying under beam and carries a green thread across a yard. The courtyard receives them with a sense that the day is folding itself neatly. The amphorae in the cool room have begun their long quiet. The press stands as calm architecture. The lamp for evening is trimmed and ready, wick cut even, shallow dish filled with the first run that taught bread humility. A cat stretches to the exact length of sunlight and then surrenders to shade, convinced it invented both. Work will taper, not end. A few mats will soak. A broom will finish its patient letter on the floor. A jug will be labeled for tomorrow's third pressing. The being will rest with its wake kissed off by the wedge. The courtyard smell shifts from fruit to clay to a cool that already thinks of night. Evening approaches by softening edges. The courtyard stones trade their bright for a quiet sheen, and the air decides not to rise any more. Work remains, but it is work that gentles muscles rather than asks them to prove anything. A clay cup passes with a mouthful of water that tastes faintly of the jug's cool. The third pressing is not a demand, it is a conversation. Warm water, no hotter than a pleasant bath, waits in the pan above the small furnace. The coals are a low red, more memory than fire. A woman tips a trickle along the top mat and watches it vanish into the weave. The warmth loosens what the fruit still holds, persuading rather than forcing. Hands turn the stack again, mat by mat, and each disc receives the same kindness. The screw lowers a touch, the windlass takes up a little line, the rope sighs as if it has remembered a story it likes to tell. Between the mats, the liquid that arrives now is paler, milky at first, then clearing into a gentle straw. It will settle. It will serve. The copper ladle moves with the same patience it gave the morning's first thread. The bowl fills with the third run's shy brightness. A cloth-lined funnel waits, the linen more open, the ash absent this time. The liquid finds its way, and the amphora that will keep it wears a different ink mark, 3 dots under the house sign, so any hand, even a hurried one in winter, will know which ladle to choose for stew and which for lamp. The boy counts each slow pour by tapping his knee. He has learned that counting is less about numbers and more about not losing the thread. When the settling jar's bottom line wakes, the woman stops and sets the jar aside to rest until dawn. Sediment likes night. A broom finishes its letter across the floor. The girl who holds it sweeps dust into a quiet hill and lifts the basket's mouth to receive it. She wipes the rim of the pressing basin with a damp strip of linen, then hangs the strip on its peg. Strips, pegs, mats, coils, everything has its companion. This is how rooms learn to feel peaceful. The amphorae in the cool room accept their last visitor for the day. Two people carry the third-run jar down the 2 steps. It joins its shelf with room left between shoulders for air. The thyme on the flat stone shares a green breath with the cool, and the spider adjusts one line of its web by a hair. In the corner, a stock of older amphorae keeps their patience. Last year's light becomes this year's lamp, a spoon at a time. Back in the courtyard, wicks get their small share. The foreman lifts the lamp jar's reed and lets one drop fall into a shallow dish of the first run. A strip of linen, twisted to a tidy rope, lays itself along the dish's rim and dips its lip into the oil. He trims the wick with a bronze pick so its mouth will burn steady and low. A match of smoldering splint whispers to the wick. Flame stands as if it has always belonged there. Bread returns from its quaff. The face that met oil earlier is cut into 4 and shared. A dish holds cucumber slices and a scatter of fennel. A handful of last year's olives adds their firm salt. The barley pot gives up 1 more spoon each. No plates are heaped, no stomach leaves unspoken for. The cat earns a morsel of cheese by arriving at exactly the moment when someone wonders whether to save it. Conversation knows the shape of evening. Someone mentions a wind that turned last week at sundown and asked if anyone else noticed. Someone else nods and says the grove remembered it too. A memory of a winter when the cool room's floor held frost for 2 mornings passes around like a small tale. The boy leans his shoulder against the doorpost and listens as if every word were about him in some useful way. Gentle commentary belongs here. Oil was wealth, yes, but also habit. Lamps needed it. Skin asked for it after dust. Bread married it at almost every meal. The work of harvest taught a house how to live the rest of the year, where to place light, how to season clay, when to trust rest over effort. It is easy to imagine feasts, but most days were like this: polite bowls, measured spoons, a glow that asked very little and gave enough. The press itself learns to sleep. The screw rises a last finger's breadth and rests with the wedge snug. The rope coils into its nest with each loop lying flat. The windlass handle points to a place on the post that means tomorrow. Mats lean in pairs, one over the other like eyelids. The millstone's path is brushed until the groove shows its honest curve, and then the brush hangs by its strap with bristles, quiet and pleased. The boy rinses his fig twig and lays it on the rim of the rinse bowl as if laying a tiny oar across a small boat. He looks at his hands, turns them palm up, and sees where oil has become a gloss, crease lines dark and clean. He rubs them together and finds they smell of leaf smoke and something like sun saved for later. The oldest pair of hands takes a lamp and walks to the cool room. He holds the dish low so shadows will stay long and friendly. He checks each amphora's cord with a thumb's press, tests a seal by touch, and touches the shelf where a damp might creep. All is well. On the way out he pauses and listens. The room tells him nothing new, which is exactly what he hopes to hear. A brief stop at the threshold belongs to everyone. The courtyard looks almost like it did at dawn, only rounder, gentler. The cat has moved to a new square of warm stone and is convinced it arranged it. The lamp throws a small halo on the bean's shoulder and makes the screw's thread shine like a quiet river. Beyond the gate, a star tests the higher sky. Sandals sit side by side under the bench as if they were two old friends who have agreed to talk again in the morning. The foreman puts a finger to the lamp wick and trims a petal from its edge. The flame answers by becoming smaller and more certain. He sets the lamp on the low wall where it can think about being a hearth. A woman ties the last cord on a clean mat into the knot that remembers not to let go. The girl taps the broom once to send the last 3 crumbs into the basket. The boy closes the gate with the quiet that proves he can. They take the day's measure without numbers. 2 amphorae for cooking, 1 for lamps, 1 jar settling for morning. Mats washed. Rope content. Bean rested. Bread shared. A spoon of oil now lives in the shrine's hollow. The rest lives here. A breeze walks through the thyme and then rests. The lamp's reflection pools in the oil dish and holds the tiny flame twice, once on cotton, once on the surface. Someone hums a line of a very old melody that has lost its words and kept its kindness. The courtyard knows when to keep a song small. Night arrives as a permission, not as an ending. The press sleeps in its frame, the amphorae sleep on their shelves, the house sleeps in the smell of leaf and clay and low flame. Morning will return with swallows and chalk dust and the first thin thread of green, but for now the work has folded itself and put itself away from this courtyard of stone and leaf. We step into another quiet room where a circle of warm brass waits on a low bench, and a patient hand teaches it to understand the sky. The stair to the loft is narrow and kind to bare feet. Coral stone walls hold the night's cool. The air smells of salt that came in on last tide and decided to stay. At the top, a wooden door swings with a rope loop for a handle, and a room opens that is more shade than interior. Wide shutters, slatted light, the roof thatch thick and patient. Below, the lane murmurs in Swahili and donkey bells. Above, a rectangle of sky quotes the sea's blue. Canvas sleeps in a folded heap like a docile animal. Today, it will learn its edges. The sailmaker shoulders brown, palms tough, voice quiet, and rolls the cloth lengthwise across the floor. This canvas is not a single sheet but panels to be married, strips woven in narrow widths from cotton that traveled over water, some new, some patched from older journeys, and washed in salt until they soften to the temper of hands. He lays the lengths edge to edge and chalks a long, friendly curve with a stick rubbed in line. The chalk leaves a line that looks like a shoreline on a child's map. Luff, he says to no one but the work, naming the forward edge that will meet the wind first. Tools have their small chorus. A palm needle, long blonde eye, sharp-tempered tip rests on a leather palm guard worn over the base of the thumb, a thick disc with a dimple of metal so the needles but can push without finding bone. Palm fiber sennit corals in flat baskets, golden and tight. It smells faintly of coconut and smoke. A wooden fid tapered smooth. A sailor's wedge waits to open cloth's weave when the needle asks a hole politely. A tin of tallow sits open, a pale moon to kiss thread so it slips and remembers to resist rot. In one corner, a bone gauge scratched with small intervals, mind spacing, because even quiet scenes prefer fairness. Before stitching, They test the canvas with hands not to dominate, only to know. The sailmaker and his nephew take an edge and, with two thumbs spread, pull gently to feel which way the cloth chooses to stretch. Woven stuff has a warp that minds its role, and a weft that likes to forget. He marks with chalk arrows where give belongs, so the finished sail will pull square in wind and not learn bad habits. Patchwork tells stories. From a stack come squares and crescents harvested from older sails. Salt-silvered, sun-bleached, they are tougher than they look. He lays one over a panel's thin place and chalks around it with an easy wrist. Yesterday helps today, he says, a proverb given to him with his first needle. The boy nods and rubs tallow into a length of sennet, then winds it lightly on his palm so it will feed smooth. The bolt rope must be borne before the seam, a spine for edge. He sets a coil of rope laid of coconut fiber, even and warm along the chalked curve, and pins it with marline spikes of wood. At intervals he stitches through canvas and rope with a round seam that bites and returns, each bite the same length as the last, each return laid flat so the rope rides inside a tunnel of cloth. The palm guard cups the needle's base, his wrist learns the rhythm. Push, draw, snug, push, draw, snug. When the curve sharpens, he shortens the stitch without apology. A good edge is a quiet argument that the wind respects. Gentle commentary belongs here. Lateen sails on these coasts were cut in triangles tall and wide, their leading edges strong to suffer the yard's weight. Their foot slack enough to drink wind and let it go. Sailmakers listened to Dhows the way millers listened to stones. Every crew swore their Loft's curve was rightest. Every curve had its river of reasons. The boy warms a square of tallow in his fingers and rubs the bone gauge so marks will show when the light slips. He sets the gauge along the seam and calls soft counts when the sailmaker's hands move faster than eyes, 1 thumb and to finger widths, 1 thumb and 1. The scene remembers the count as evenness. Cloth, like people, prefers rhythm to surprise. Below, the Dhow's mast knocks once against its support, a hollow sound that means the tide is thinking about turning. Voices carry up from the quay, someone singing as if talking to water, someone bargaining about sardines, a child laughing at a crab that forgot how to be sideways. The loft holds its own weather, breeze pours through the shutters, the thatch breathes out spice from a market that stored its aromas here on an older day. And the canvas releases a dry dust that smells like the road before it smelled like sea. He chalks the clue lower aft corner, where hard pull concentrate sand lays to patches in an X before the first has even earned a name. Through layers, needle and palm go together. He spins the needle with thumb and forefinger so the point finds weave with less complaint. The fit opens the cloth just ahead of the needle's hunger, and then waits like a patient door. The nephew watches the twist of the stitch and copies it on another seam a yard away, tongue between teeth, the way a boy's body remembers focus. Eyelets come grommets for lashings, for reef points to tame the sail when wind grows opinionated, for ties that lead to mast and yard. He sets a ring of twine and stitches a buttonhole stitch around the opening, round and even, thick with tallow so rot will find refusal. His thumb checks that number of thread will cut a line later. He tests with the fid, the whole welcomes, then holds. A break belongs to the day without making the day break. A tin cup full of chai visits the room, and to hands a neighbor woman who sells buns below sends it up with a smile the sailmaker can hear but not see. The tea is small, sweet, bright with ginger. A plate of mandazi sits like little moons, and disappears in easy bites. Grease marks on fingers are wiped on a rag that always knew it would be so. The boy grins because heat in the mouth wakes new patience in the hand. Back to the luff. The bolt rope turns a corner at the head, the upper point where the long yard will meet. He splices the ropes into itself in a short I-3 tucks, then 3, then a half tuck to lay the tail flat. Palm fiber accepts the splice like family. He seizes the L with wax twine so it will not teach itself bad manners. Over that, canvas folds and becomes a pocket. Stitches lock the pocket shut with the same small distance, the same friendly snug. He speaks to the sail the way some speak to animals. There, he says when a curve lies smooth. Not yet, he says to a seam that has misremembered straightness. And picking happens with a bone pick whose point is too dull to be cruel. He lifts the stitch, teases it back, and lays it again without scolding anyone responsible. Cloth learns faster when nobody blushes. Gentle commentary can rest here. Some sails borrow patches not only for strength but for memory. A square from a voyage to Eden sits next to a crescent from a run to Kilwa. Stories hide in stitching under palms, in the way a seam narrows where a storm once asked a question. To read a sail is to read a map of winds a body cannot see. The afternoon extends its first gold finger through the shutters. In that light, the canvas shows threads the way a field shows furrows near sunset. He takes up a small brush and dusts chalk from the finished scene so the white will not lie to him later. The boy sweeps under the cloth with a woven brush, bringing out curls of sennet and short threadlings that would try to become knots under someone's knee. A last task for this first part of the day. Test the edge. He and the boy lift the panel and hold it toward the opening where wind plays. The cloth bows a little, finds tension along the bolt rope, and returns like a chest that has learned to breathe slow. He nods. Tomorrow, he says, meaning later, meaning when we have given the day its supper. He lays the panel down over a strip of reed mat so sand cannot find the cloth's heart. The palm needle goes into a cork. The fid rests on a core like a sleeping fish on a nest of weed. From the lane, a seller of lines sings a line about their green being a promise. From the quay, a man calls the tide by name as if it were cousin. From the loft, nothing loud answers, only the small sound of a hand finding the chalk and setting it where tomorrow will expect it. The day leans past noon. Heat presses the roof thatch into quiet obedience, and the shade loft returns the favor with a soft breath that smells of palm and salt. The sailmaker sets the chalk panels side by side and kneels to draw the long triangle that will become the Lateen's bodyhead to the high corner, tack to the forward foot, clue to the after end where pull gathers. He begins by truing the edges that will marry. With the bone gauge he marks a thin margin, no more than a finger's width, and with a small knife he skims stray threads until the cloth answers clean. The nephew holds a wooden straight edge while the chalk traces the seam line a curve more suggestion than curve, gentle as a coastline in clear weather. Not a ruler's triangle, the sailmaker says. A wind's triangle, the boy nods and repeats the word for the good edge fair. Joining comes with the flat fell seam that sailors trust. He lays one panel over the other so its edge overlaps a thumb. The palm needle pushes, the fit opens, the sennet passes through. He pulls the stitch flat and then folds the free edge over the first, tucking it down to lie smooth like a narrow ribbon. A second line of stitching walks along the fold, catching cloth and scents. The seam becomes to lines with no loose lips to welcome fray. He rubs a smudge of tallow along the seam so the thread will love sea water as a visitor, not a tenant. The panels grow from 2 to 3, from 3 to 5, the triangle widening as if remembering wings. Where older patches meet new cloth, he staggers joins so no single place carries all the faith. The bone gauge taps along at his side, reminding distance. The boy's counting becomes a low chant, thumb and 1, thumb and 2, so time and seam share one pace. At the loft, the bolt rope receives its attention. He whips at the protective spiral that binds rope and edge into one thought. Tallowed twine crosses in a tidy helix, each turn kissing the last. Where the rope bends toward the head, he shortens turns, stacking them like careful words before an important name. The nephew follows with a palm stone, rubbing the whipping until it smooths and shines. There, the sailmaker says, now wind can slide without catching its coat. Corners ask for respect. He lays a broad patch at the head, diamond-shaped and doubled. Another at the tack, where the foot and luff meet, and the yard's forward pull will live. At the clew, he builds a small fortress of layers, old sail heartward, new sail awkward, then stitches them a circle that becomes a square, and then crosses that square with an X. He works the needle through all thicknesses with the palm guard's metal cup, pressing the butt until it agrees to go. He pauses between pushes to breathe out, a trick that turns effort into quiet. Grommet-sized grow within these corners. He opens a round with the fit, then binds it with a buttonhole stitch until the hole has a firm lip. He measures the hole with a smooth peg. The peg sits snug and pleased. At the clews he passes a short length of palm rope and splices it back into itself to form a soft ring for the sheet to love. He serves the splice with waxed twine, rubbing the service smooth until it looks poured rather than wound. The loft hears the afternoon wind arrive up the channel. It climbs the lane like a patient visitor and tries each shutter with one palm. The sailmaker smiles without looking up. The canvas stirs in answer, lifts an inch, then relaxes, learning already that it belongs to air. He weighs the cloth's edge with a line of smooth stone so the wind can admire without rearranging. Reef points come next, those modest chords that let a crew make the sail smaller when sea and sky ask for less. He marks 2 rows across the belly of the triangle, chalk dots evenly spaced from luff to leech. At each dot he opens a small slit, no bigger than the tip of his little finger. He passes a short length of soft line through, ties a reef knot that lies flat and literal, then binds the slit's edges with a ring of stitches so the cloth will not teach itself to tear. He tugs each point once and twice, each answers with the same polite firmness. The boy ties the knots the same way, left over right, right over left, tongue set sideways in a signature of concentration. Between tasks, he picks up the straight sailmaker's palm and taps the seam in 3 places with the side of his fist. It is not force, only reminder. The seam answers by settling. He leans back and listens to his own back, then stretches arms slow, the way a mast leans to test its stays on a quiet day. A neighbor's voice lifts from the lane, bargaining about clothes. Another calls charcoal by the basket. A donkey shakes its tackle and settles into stillness that will last exactly as long as it chooses. The wind presses a fresh salt note through the shutters and brings a distant memory of fish scales drying in shade. The boy remarks on the snow without complaint. The sailmaker says, Wind remembers what it has touched, and threads another length of sennit. He chalks the leech the after edge of the sail where a curl can creep in and steal sleep from sailors. To guard against that curl, he lays a narrow band of tape along it, a strip of cloth cut on the bias so it will stretch without sulking. He stitches the tape down with small diagonal bites, each crossing the line of weave like one reed over another in a mat. The leech line, a thin cord, runs inside this tape and emerges near the clue. A hitch there will let the crew take a little of the edge's mischief away if the wind teaches it the wrong songs. He leaves the tail long for now and tucks it under a temporary stitch. The boy selects patches with stories. One shows a fainting sneer where a trader wrote Kilwa and forgot to wash it out. Another carries a ghost pattern from a net that once dried on it under noon. He places them where once hid, and laughingly refuses to visit again. The Sailmaker lets him choose within reason. Patches are maps, he says. If you place them well, someone can read the winds you have not yet met. They roll the joined triangle's foot toward the window and test its pull against air. The bolt rope holds straight, the canvas bars even. The boy holds one corner and feels the loft tug with a promise he cannot yet name. It wants to go, he says. Everything that floats wants to go, the Sailmaker answers. Our work is to teach it how to return. Tea appears again, cooler, sweetened the way afternoon prefers. The Mondazi plate is a memory, and neighbor's bun takes its place, split with a knife that knows salt better than sugar. Fingers are wiped on a rag that now carries a language of stitches, tallow, chalk, and crumbs. Back to corners for one more kindness. He sews little leather chafing patches where the yard's bindings will kiss the head. Leather accepts puncture, resists rub, and ages into grace. He pierces with an awl, stitches with waxed thread, and rubs the seam with tallow. A smell of animal and sea shares a polite handshake. The afternoon wind grows, pressing the shutters into a low drum. The Sailmaker sets a small stone on each shutter's sill, a habit that keeps conversation sensible. He asks the boy to coil sennit in 3 baskets, one for fine, one for middling, one for the coarse the way minds coil thought, one beside the other without envy. The boy's coils rise like baskets on a woman's head in market-day imagination, balanced for the pleasure of balance alone. Light slants gold. Chalk shines, then dulls. He chalks and pricks the tacks lashing path holes for the rope that will bind cloth to yard and to mast. The fit opens each mark, the needle follows, the stitch lays flat, then flat again. He tests one lashing by threading a short line through and drawing tight. The cloth puckers, then smooths. Good, he says, which in this room means the work and the day have shaken hands. He stands and looks at the triangle hole. The Lateen is not yet a sail, not until it meets its spar and the wind's mind, but the promise is their edge strong, corners quiet, belly clean, points ready. He lays a palm on the bolt rope and feels the cordage's heat under the cloth, the day's warmth kept like a secret inside a friendly spine. He covers the triangle with a sheet of matting to keep off dust and paws. The palm needle slides again into its cork, the thread nestles against the bone gauge. He ties the tallow tin's lid with a string so rats will not learn pastry habits. The boy sweeps with short, certain strokes. Curls of fiber collect like small question marks, and then agree to be an answer in the basket. Wind hums in the shutters and promises a trial before sunset. The light shifts toward copper. In that color the canvas looks older and wiser, as if it has already sailed and come back kindly to report. Down in the lane, someone calls the tide our auntie, and the tide answers by lifting a bucket against a key step. Time to meet the spar. The sailmaker lays the Lateen yard along the loft's longest, while a long, tapered pole of mangrove, straight by eye and truer by hand. The wood smells of salt and sun and a little tar brushed long ago into its grain. He tests the yard's bow with a palm at either end and a gentle press. Wants the wind, not war, he says, pleased that it yields a breath and no more. They bring the triangle close, roll the head across the spar, and set the first lashing. The boy feeds a soft palm rope under the yard, over the canvas, through the head's double patch and leather chafe, and back under. The sailmaker shows the hitch turn and tuck, then a riding turn that bites without chewing. He snugs the knot, then loosens it just enough that canvas can think while wind teaches it. Lashings go along the head at measured intervals, the bone gauges little scratches keeping distance honest. Each knot is dressed, tails lie flat like well-behaved fish. At the tack, he threads a stouter line through the grommet and around the spar, then makes a seizing that cannot change its mind. He leans into the pole with his shoulder, finds the line's voice, and stops when it says enough. The coup gets its first handshake with the sheet ring passed through back around, and seized only for fitting now, not the voyage, but ropes prefer a rehearsal to surprise. The leech line waits inside its bias tape like a quiet cousin at a wedding. He draws its tail free near the coup and pulls, until the edge signs a small promise of straightness. Not too much leech lines that brag tear cloth. He ties a temporary hitch and fixes the tail with a single stitch he can cut with teeth later. Near the head, he opens a tiny doorway in the tape and brings the line's head out to a small toggle, a piece of bone rubbed smooth by many pangs. So you can ease it when wind sulks, he tells the boy. The boy nods solemnly as if easing wind were a thing anyone could do. Grommets along the Loft, those small eyes that will greet mast lashings, get their final comfort. He rubs each with tallow and twirls the fid to be sure the opening is round and friendly. He tests with a short peg, the peg turns without wobble. Where twine showed a whisker, he snips it and burns the end quickly with a straw taper so it will forget in spooling. They hoist the spar to the window. 2 ropes hang from a beam, their ends knotted in simple loops. The boy lifts one loop, the sailmaker threads the yard's thinner end through it, then the thicker end through the other. On account they pull, the yard rises, the canvas spills its quiet across air. One shutter is tied back. Afternoon wind reaches in with both hands, curious but not rude. The triangle lifts and fills, not with force, only with shape. Along the bolt rope, strength speaks. Across the belly, a soft tense that feels like a chest rising. "Hallo," the sailmaker says, and the sail says it back in cloth. Now the tests. He sights along the luff, checking that the curve agrees with the chuck that dreamed it. It does, mostly. At one place the cloth wants a whisper more discipline. He lowers the yard a palm's breadth, sets a tiny additional stitch nestled between 2 older ones, then raises the yard again. The cloth learns faster when correction is small. He runs his knuckles gently along the leech. It hums a little, a sign that it would like a half fist of leech line. He pulls the line's tail, hears the hum become a murmur, and ties off again. The belly of the sail now looks like a hand cupped for water. The boy stands in the window's light, eyes narrow against the sky. There's a crease, he says, pointing where a diagonal shadow tries to call itself a fold. A ghost of one, the sailmaker says. It will leave when the yard is high and the tack listens. He readies the tack lashings a finger closer to the head and smooths the cloth with the back of his hand. The ghost remembers another job and goes. Below, the quay receives the afternoon's errands. Fish lay in neat rows with eyes that reflect sky. A pot mends under charcoal. Someone beats palm fiber into submission with a rhythm that agrees with walking. Donkeys consider moving and mostly decline. A dhow knocks its hull against a fender made from a tire that has never met a road of future in a present that does not yet know its name. Back in the loft, the clue ring twitches like a tail. The sailmaker takes the sheet a line thick enough to trust-passes it through the ring and sets a bowline that will not slip even if argument comes. He ties a second, smaller safety beside it, a habit taught by a man who disliked watching knots untie themselves at dusk. He hauls on the sheet while the boy lifts the yard a breath more. The triangle flattens to its traveling mind, then relaxes when he eases. Cloth enjoys learning the words enough and they're more than it enjoys more. Reef points take their first polite talk. He ties one row together across the sail's belly, not to bind it, only to test that the knots sit flat, and the spacing reads as a sentence, not a shout. He unties them, and lets the little cords dangle again like tassels on a scholar's cap. He trims to ends shorter so they will not flirt with lines that pass by in wind. Small courtesies prevent large apologies. A last kindness for the corners. He sews a tiny leather wallet over the crew's leech tape end, a cap to keep the tape from learning to peel. He rubs the stitches with tallow until they look like lines spoken in a low voice. He checks the head's double patch, presses it with his thumb until it gives the same story in both directions, then smiles because it does. Now for the loft's window trial. He lowers the yard a hand, gathers the triangle into a loose fold so the cloth will not bite itself, and ties the head and clue to the rope so the sail can hang free without the spar. This shows him how the cloth will drape when wet and when men fold it too quickly. He lifts a corner and lets it fall. It falls like water in a well, no stubbornness, no hard hinges of fabric. He nods. The boy mirrors the motion at another corner and grins because cloth behaving looks like magic when you are allowed to take credit for it. He lowers the sail entirely and lays it flat again. Chalk marks receive a soft brush. The last chalk memory leaves so the sea will not think the cloth already belongs to another loft. He threads through each luff grommet a short messenger line, the little cords that will help crew lash canvas to mast without fighting the first day's stiffness. He ties each in a cow hitch so they will stay to be found by fingers that will be busy with other things. The window gives the downstairs world in a frame. A boy on the quay sees the loft's movement and waves without believing anyone can see him. The sailmaker lifts his palm anyway. "Send it down," he says. The boy upstairs, his nephew, brightens. This is the part where loft becomes boat. They fasten to long ropes to the yard at measured intervals and pay the spar out through the window, guiding so it will not bite the frame. The boy below, another nephew borrowed from the carpenter, catches the spars and with the ease given to those who grew up under wide sky. He cushions it against his shoulder and walks it into the Dhow's embrace. Lines take their places, pass under, over, back through. The sail follows, folded like a calm animal, each corner announced as it arrives. Head coming down, mind your toes. Who coming, mind your ear? Laughter. A bark. Someone sneezes and proves the world remains ordinary. On deck, the crew lays the triangle along the yard, reads each lashing by touch, and hums a tune too old to own. The sailmaker points from above where to loosen, where to snug, where to leave the sea to teach. He drops the leech-lying tail and watches it land in a coil that looks almost intentional. He ties a small bundle of extra sennit and lets it follow. A hand catches both with gratitude that lives more in shoulders than in words. The boy in the loft looks at the space the sail has left, the mat's pale rectangle, the coil's missing ring, the way the room has become larger, not because anything grew, but because something left. Spaces tell stories. It feels like a mouth after a song, he says. The sailmaker nods. And like a stomach after bread, he answers. And both comparisons satisfy for different reasons. On the quay, the Dhow raises the yard hand by hand to see how the triangle hangs. Wind runs its palm along the leech and listens. The canvas takes shape without insult. The crew comes aft, the tack comes forward, the head leans with a mind to obey. The skipper bareheaded, eyes that count cloud edges without seeming to, gives a single small nod that in this town is praise enough to last a week. Upstairs, the sailmaker coils the work ropes, wipes the bone gauge with a thumb, and pushes the tallow tin's lid tight. He sets the palm needle in its cork and tucks both into a leather roll that smells of cumin and brine. He leans on the windowsill and watches the boat drift against her fender. The sail, now halfway tied in, looks like an idea learning to be a thing. Evening begins in the channel. Light goes from copper to syrup. The loft grows one shade deeper. Tea arrives without being asked, in a cup that has learned all the fingers of this room. Steam goes up, then changes its mind. The boy gulps too fast and huffs, grinning. The sailmaker sips small. He prefers to leave the last sweet mouthful for the room, the way some leave crumbs for birds. Work will finish with the next light. For now, the triangle has taken its oath. The sea has heard it. Dusk walks down the channel with a hand on the water's shoulder. The key changes voice, iron rings groan a little, ropes clear their throats, gulls write shorter sentences. On deck, the Dhow's crew stands easy, feet set to wood that knows them. The new sail lies along the yard like a folded wing with good manners. The skipper touches the clew ring, then the tack lashing, as if recognizing old friends in new clothes. Final fittings prefer calm. The sailmaker steps aboard with the careful hop of someone who has stepped aboard more times than he can count, never once in a hurry. He squats near the head and lays his palm on the leather chafe patch. Warm from the day, it feels like a friendly shoulder. He threads a last lashing through the head grommet and over the yard, sets the knot in a place that will keep out of trouble, and smears a finger of tallow across the turn so salt will not learn to chew there. At the luff, he shows the crew the messenger cords he tied earlier. Hands, scarred and sure, use them to pull the longer lashings through the grommets and around the mast. The lashings lie in a neat spiral from tack up to head, not tight, not loose, just enough to let canvas slide when the yard swings to starboard or port. A sailor sings under his breath while his fingers work. The song holds the spacing steady better than a gauge could. The leech line waits for its first real conversation with wind. The sailmaker unpicks the little temporary stitch and passes the tail to the sheetman. "Only as much as it asks," he says. The sheetman grins. "Like shearing fish," he answers. The skipper nods, pleased that metaphors have joined the crew. They raise the yard 3 hands. The triangle climbs, unfolds, lifts its own weight with a modest pride. Evening breeze reaches from the channel, and the cloth wakes into shape. The sail bows shallow, the bolt rope stands like a line drawn by a sure hand. Along the leech, a small tremor no more than a cat settling tells the sheetman to take a thumb of line. He does. The tremor turns to a hum, the hum to a sigh. Someone says they're without meaning to. A short test will do. The skipper eases the bow off the key. Fenders squeak and then forget. The Dhow's nose finds the lane of tide. The yard angles, the sheet pays out, the tack feels its work. Wind strokes the canvas and gets a clean answer. The boat moves, not fast, not slow, the way a conversation moves when both sides listen. The sailmaker watches the leech, then the luff, then the belly's curve. He tilts his head. The luff shows a whisper of folds near the lower third, nothing rude, just a reminder that the tack could be an inch more forward. He gestures with 2 fingers. A sailor pops the lashing, shifts it, and ties again. The folds pack their bags and go elsewhere. They pass the mouth of an alley where smoke from a cooking pot tries briefly to be fog. The cloth catches the scent and lets it go. The crew eases to windward and then to leeward. The sail holds its talk without stammer. A boy on the aft deck barefoot, hair thinking about a future hat, keeps eyes on the crew ring as if learning the weather in its movement. "It winks," he says. "Good," the skipper replies. "Let it wink, not stare." Near the channel's middle, they turn. The yard swings with a creak that sounds like a satisfied old door. The sail crosses the boat's heart and takes the other wind as if it had known it since childhood. The leech murmurs. The sheetman gives one more thumb. The Dhow smooths. The skipper's shoulders drop half a finger. "Praise enough." Twilight settles like the lid on a compote. They put the boat back to the quay with 2 small pushes of the rudder. Mooring lines go around rings and half hitches, and good sense. The sail lowers into arms, and across shoulders, it folds without sulking. The skipper touches the cloth once more as people touch a young goat that will later pull its weight, but today just learns to be held. There is always a last small fix. Back in the loft, a lantern takes its place near the window, flame trimmed low so light is warm and soft. The sail returns to the map like a visitor, invited back for spiced tea. Chalk lines that did not quite rub out in the golden hour now show us faint ghosts under lantern light, easy to forgive, easy to finish. The sailmaker lifts a seam near the clue and finds one stitch that bragged and made its neighbor shy. He unpicks it with the bone pick, lays the 2 again with even breath, and taps the seam with the flat of his hand. It listens. He checks each reef point with a tug, firm, flat, willing. One loop reveals an eager whisker of twine that could catch a passing line. He burns the whisker with a straw taper held just close enough, then smooths the place with a thumb. He rubs a trace of tallow across the leech tape where the edge will meet the yard rope over and over. He finds a place where chalk can be washed with 1 damp rag instead of 2. He smiles at the arithmetic of small economies. The nephew threads the bone gauges thong through its own hole so It will not wander. Then wind sent it coils into tighter spirals that sleep better. The lantern's flame writes lines on the fid like tiny rivers. The boy asks if wind sees those lines when it peeks in. Wine smells more than it sees, the sailmaker says. It looks with its hands. A neighbor climbs the stair, leaves a dish of cassava and coconut, and vanishes like a helpful ghost. They eat with fingers, quiet chewing tea between bites. The food tastes of salt and dawn. The lantern makes the room feel smaller in a friendly way, like a boat that does not mind its size. A blessing belongs somewhere near the end of a making. The sailmaker does not lay hands and speak words meant to be heard in a mosque. Those belong there. He does the blessing of his craft, a last look for fairness, a gentle pull on each corner, a palm pressed flat to the cloth's belly as if listening for a child's breath. Under his hand the canvas holds a warmth from the day's sun and the room's talk. Sail well, he says, which is the right-sized prayer for a thing built to leave and return. He ties the leech line's tail into a small, honest coil, and tucks it into a cloth pocket he stitches with 4 quick bites. He threads a spare messenger cord through the luff-top grommet and knots its end in a way only his nephews copy exactly. He rolls the head toward the clue not too tight, and binds the roll in 3 places so it will travel down without discovering new folds on the way. He sets the bundle by the window where night air can tell its stories it has told older sails. Outside, the channel becomes a ribbon of pewter. Lanterns along the lane glow inside little glass houses. A drum speaks once, and then decides it has said enough. The Dhow below tugs at her lines with impatience that is actually readiness. On the foredecks, someone laughs at a joke that was old in their grandfather's time. The joke still works because it knows where to stand. In the loft, tools return to their nests. The palm needle kisses its cork. The fid leans its tapered shoulder against the tallow tin. The bone gauge sleeps on the rolled mat. The lantern's wick is trimmed to a smaller ball of flame, and then pinched with 2 damp fingers, a soft hiss like a lizard's sigh. They stand at the window a moment more. The sail's bundle waits at their feet. The boy says tomorrow, as if tomorrow were a boat with a name. On the morning tide, the sailmaker answers. He draws the shutter almost closed and leaves a finger's width for breeze to visit. Night sits down. The loft keeps watch in its way, all edges smooth, all threads tucked. The channel breathes in and out like a sleeping chest. Morning walks up the channel carrying a silver bowl of light. The loft's thatch lets a few threads through, thin and clean. The sail's bundled roll by the window smells of canvas, tallow, and the first star. The boy wakes the room with broom strokes that barely speak. The sailmaker's hands find the leather tool roll, touch each shaped like beads on a quiet rosary, and then close it again. Today is for sending. Down on the quay, Dhow has written careful dots on every rope. The Dhow's hull wears last night's pewter now turned to milk. Men greet one another with short jokes that taste like coffee even before coffee has happened. The skipper lifts a hand toward the loft without needing to see if the hand is seen. They carry the sail down the stair in a simple choreography, the sailmaker taking the head, the boy the clue, the roll settled between them like a calm animal trusting the harness. Someone at the foot of the stair whistles the beginning of a song the sailmaker's grandfather favored. It finds its way into the morning without blush. The bundle crosses the lane above, sand worn to silk. A cat changes places with the bundle for 1 precise second and then pretends it did not. On deck, the roll opens. The head meets the yard with the comfort of a familiar pillow. Lashings return to their posts. The messenger cords at the luff earn their keep, pulling longer lashings through grommets that still remember being holes. Knots climb the mast in a spiral that pleases both practical eyes and those who enjoy pattern. The crew ring says hello to its sheet. A man with hands like small trees checks the tack twice by habit and then once more for courtesy. The leech line's tail comes forward, nudges the toggle near the head, and waits like a good servant outside a door. The sail rises on the yard, unrolling in a single long breath. Dawn wind comes from the channel with the courtesy of a guest who knocks before entering. The cloth fills and finds itself. For a blink, the sail looks new. For the next blink, it looks as if it has known this boat longer than any of them. They cast off. The quay's stone steps step backward in a friendly way. Fenders, relieved, hang slack. The Dhow's boat tastes the tide and agrees with it. Water leans, then smiles along the hull. The skipper chooses a course with half an eyebrow. The helmsman understands. The boy who watched the crew ring last night watches it again and hears the same truth. Winking is good. The sail speaks in low syllables. Along the luff, a crisp line tells of proper pull. Across the belly, a softness lies that carries wind without scolding it. At the leech, not a tremor, the leech line makes its quiet promise good. The yard creaks once in greeting to the morning, and then forgets to creak further. The boat walks. They run down the channel where mangroves hold their breath for kingfishers. A flock of terns drafts the wind just above the yard, small white pennants with hearts. On deck, a pot warms, and someone crushes cardamom with the butt of a knife. The worked canvas overhead filters sunlight into a pale tea. The sailmaker stands near the mast and does not touch anything. This is part of the craft, knowing when hands are witnesses. Outside the mouth, the sea has its slow shoulders on. Low swell passes under with a rhythm older than stories. The skipper luffs briefly, watching the sail's head, then eases again. The triangle answers like a thought remembered at the right time. Its patches old journeys sewn into new catch light, and sheed by turns, so small weather moves across the cloth in private. Reef at once, the skipper says, not for need, but to teach the new points their names. The crew ties the first row across the belly, left over right, right over left, as rehearsed in the loft. The sail, smaller by a hand, holds shape, as if shape were nothing to argue. A rope sings a short phrase against wood, and then quiets. The boy grins because the doing looks like the drawing he watched in chalk. The sailmaker nods because the drawing came from doing. They shake the reef out again. The sail climbs to its fuller self with no lingering wrinkles. A flying fish mistakes air for water and corrects its error with a modest splash. The skipper looks to the horizon where today's errand weight spots. Salt, a list no longer than a thumb. The boat keeps time with its own clock, a slap at the bow, a quiet under the stern, the canvas soft sentence in between. Later, at a mark the crew knows by a line of darker water, the skipper turns homeward. The yard swings, the sail passes with a smooth yawn of cloth and rope. The boat answers with cheerful obedience. The sailmaker allows himself to breathe like someone who did not notice he had been waiting to breathe. They enter the channel as the tide returns from its errand. Eddies write invisible letters among mangrove roots. A gull drops a shell onto a favored stone and cocks its head at success. The dhow bows to the quay with grace, then steps sideways on its lines the way a dancer yields space. Hands lower the sail, the canvas finds arms, the yard rests. A palm tests the leech tape still smooth. A finger tests the leech lines not still honest. Payment today is a small purse and something wrapped in palm leaf, a ginger root with knobs like a living map. The skipper presses the purse into the sailmaker's hand and the ginger into the boy's, as if the transaction included a lesson on seasons. For tea, he says. The sailmaker smiles, the sort of smile that fits a pocket. He tucks the purse beside the tool roll without looking at it now. The ginger breathes in the boy's hands as if it knew water. The sail returns to the loft only in part, a coil of spare messenger cords, the tallow tin, the tool roll, the memory of the morning. The room looks larger again in that way rooms do when their patient tenant has moved out and taken noise within. The palm needle rests in cork for the length of a breath, then joins the fit, the gauge, the tallow, and order like a shelf of short stories. There is time for one small maintenance kindness. He rubs a thin touch of oil into the leather palm guard where the dimple meets needle butt. He polishes the fid with a scrap of cloth until it shines like a fish under noon. He ties the bone gauge's thong to a beam so it can lower itself to whatever future, and will reach. The boy sweeps, and the floor whispers thank you. They step to the window and watch the dhow make its last broad turn in the channel, sail furled in a long thoughtful roll along the yard. The skipper looks up and lifts to fingers a sign that means good sail and also good morning. The sailmaker lifts his hand in reply. The boy waves twice and then waves once more for himself. Gentle commentary can sit here. A sail is a conversation written in cloth. Wind asks. Canvas answers. Rope defines the grammar. A boat reads out loud. The maker listens from shore, hearing what he cannot quite hear, and finds it enough. They close the shutter to a hand's width. The loft cools by degrees. The leftover ginger, set near the window, perfumes the air that enters to take its portion of the day. The sailmaker knots the leather tool roll and sets it on the mat's edge, where tomorrow's work another seam, another patch, or a small repair will find it without asking where it has been. As the dhow glides toward open water and the loft grows still, we travel far north to a winter house of snow and quiet breath, where a crescent of soapstone holds a patient flame and a woman's careful hand keeps the dark. Polite. Night has not truly ended for weeks, only softened at its edges. Outside, the snow house sits like a white ear that listens to wind. Inside, the air is warmer than breath and holds the soft animal smell of skin, sinew, and wool. At the room's heart rests a crescent of soapstone, the Qulliq set on a low platform of packed snow faced with a thin slab to slow the melt. The lamp is shallow, its inner rim shining with a clean, dark glaze from many days of flame. Along the crescent's lip lies a line of wick made from dried moss and shredded tundra cotton, braided loosely so oil can walk. A woman kneels beside the lamp. Her parka of caribou skin is fur side in for warmth, fur side out at the hood to frame her breath. Under it, a soft inner layer of scrape hide rests like a second house on her shoulders. Knits are off. Her hands prefer careful work uncovered. Her hair is braided and wrapped, pinned with a small bone. She touches the wick with a carved pick flat at one end, pointed at the other, shaping it to the lamp's curve so flames will rise in a neat line and not quarrel. See oil waits dark and clear in a small stone bowl, thickened by cold, and then persuaded by warmth to behave like water again. With a spoon whittled from driftwood, she draws a strip of oil along the wick's length so the moss will drink. The lamp answers first with a low gloss, then with a breath of scent fat and sea and something like summer fish drying in shade, memory rather than present. She draws a coal from the embers of last night's shoulder fire, a slit of red sleeping under a shallow drift of ash. She slides the coal against the wick's end with the bone pick and waits. Flame shows itself the way a smile does, reluctant, then ready. It runs along the braided line in a series of small beads that swell and join until the lamp holds one long, even flame. Gentle commentary can sit here. In this winter house, the Qulliq is more than light. It is stove, hearth, water-maker, mood-keeper, and clock. Its line of fire can be trimmed taller for cooking, shorter for sewing, wider to heat the sleeping platform, or pinched to calm the air when the youngest cannot settle. It speaks a steady language. Families learn to hear the day in the lamp's voice. She leans close and trims with the pick, taking the blackened crust from the flame's edge so the blue-white heart can show. A good flame licks higher than a finger, lower than a palm, and wears a small blue shoe where it meets the wick. Too much, and smoke tattoos the dome. Too little, and water forgets how to become itself. Her hands find the just right without counting. The platform along the wall, built from snow and covered with woven grass mats, is a bed by night and a bench by day. It rises above the floor so warmth can pool where bodies will rest. On the mats like caribou skins fur up, soft enough to make elbow and hip feel old friends. A child stirs under a skin and resettles, a mittened hand finding the edge and tucking it back with the absent mastery of the half-asleep. A man already awake sits cross-legged with a length of sinew thread between his lips, warming it with breath before it meets a needle. His parka's hem shows fresh stitches, a line of small decisions on a long journey of winter. The woman sets a pot on a hook whale bone, polished by ears suspended above the lamp's bright edge. Into the pot she drops snow, clean from a drift cut with a knife just outside, and slapped free of wine crust. Snow settles, melts, remembers its weight, and becomes water. She adds more, and more again, the sound of it like quiet beads. Soon, steam rises in a ribbon with no hurry in it. She holds a spoon above, letting droplets gather, then fall. A small test. Water is ready. From a pouch she measures a pinch of tea trade leaf, precious enough to count out on special days, shared now because morning needs something to name it. The pot whispers. A wooden cup, rubbed smooth by rinses of oil after many uses, waits with a patient circle. She fills it halfway, then gives it to the man, who warms his fingers and then his mouth. He passes it back. She drinks last, not by rule, only by habit. She has been tasting the runes since she woke. Boot soles, turned toes up on a rack near the entry tunnel, dry in the lamp's honest heat. They are stitched from sealskin, soles thick and tough, uppers soft and quiet. Between inner and outer boots, dry moss waits to be traded out, a day's worth of breath caught, and then given back to the earth. The woman checks one pair with a thumb nearly done. She will scrape the outer leather later with a dull blade to make it drink oil when oil is available. The sound of scraping is a winter song. Today, the lamp sings instead. She takes up a small needle made from bone, I punch with a patient awl, and threads it with sinew split fine from a tendon soaked and teased into strands. In her lap lies a mitten's cuff that has learned to fray where knives and fish and ice have caught it their names. She stitches in short, even lengths, biting through skin, and returning with the thread laid flat. Sinew swells when it meets damp, seams tighten as if they are proud to be included. She hums without a melody, the sound people make when rhythm is enough. On a low trough carved from driftwood, strips of meat rest, thawed just enough to shave. She holds a woman's knife, a half-moon blade set in a handle that fits the palm like a learned word. With slow, sure motion she slices thin curls of frozen meat, and gives the first curl to the child now sitting up, hair a soft mess of sleep. The child chews, patient, then reaches for another piece with a mitten off, and a grin almost awake. A butter-soft block of fat sits at edge of tray, a bite follows neat in the mouth and makes heat inside. Above, the dome glows faintly with lamplight. Blocks of snow, cut and laid in tidy wedges, fit so closely that drafts mind their manners. At the roof's small vent, a flap of skin hangs on a thong. The man adjusts it a finger's width to let smoke's thoughts leave without stealing warmth. Along the wall, tools rest on pegs, a harpoon head swaddled in cloth, a line spool carved from bone, a scraper with a new edge traced in earlier evening. None of them hurry. They are winter's letters, to be read when sea and light speak louder again. Gentle commentary can rest here. Soapstone is not merely stone, it is memory. Lamps such as this are cut and ground from a single piece, their crescents shaped by hands that have known the weight of winter. When a lamp cracks, it is repaired with thong and patience. Families carry lamps the way others carry names. A lamp can move from mother to daughter, from tent to snow house, from one shore to the next, each new place teaching the flame its duty again. The woman trims the wick once more, a small adjustment at the far end where flame had begun to lean. She pulls away the char with the pick's flat and feeds a thread of oil along the fresh moss. The flame straightens like a child in a story being told. She smiles without showing teeth and checks the pot. It whispers still. She sprinkles a pinch of dried willow leaf into the water tea's quiet cousin when trade is thin and lets it breathe its color out. Outside, wind judges the house with a palm and then slides away, polite today. The entry tunnel speaks in a low voice of snow shifting. The man listens and decides there is no work in that sound. The child has found a toil length of bone with a row of holes and blows across it until a small bird song answers. The lamp's flame reflects in the child's eyes like a tiny second pupil. The woman watches and sees warmth turn to attention. She turns the pot aside a little so the water will not forget manners and boil too eager. From a sealskin pouch she takes berries that had been kept from summer small and tart, their color softened by time. She sets 3 at the edge of the driftwood trough to soften by warmth and become a sweet for later. Gifts like these make winter candid about its kindness. She reaches for a small brush made from ptarmigan feathers bound to a sliver of bone. With it she tiddies soot from the lamp's outside rim, not for show, but because clean stone holds heat more evenly. The soot falls in a line onto a folded scrap that will go to the outside drift. The snow knows how to make such work vanish without offense. The lamp speaks its long sentence across the room. The house replies with small answers. A pop of sinew as a stitch draws true, the shift of a boot on its rack, the soft slurp of a child finishing a curl of meat, the whisper of water learning to be tea. Morning by this clock is simply the lamp's evenness and the absence of hurry. Snow thickens its quiet against the walls, a slow press that sounds like soft hands smoothing a blanket. Inside, the lamp writes an even line of fire along its crescent. The room answers by becoming round with warmth. What must be done today is not loud. Render oil, ready wicks, mend seams, and guide the heat to sit where bodies are. Fresh oil first. On a low shelf carved from a driftwood plank, a sealskin bag rests, heavy with fat from the last hunt. The woman draws it closer and opens the tie with her teeth and thumb. Fat slides out in pale slabs that remember cold. She lays the pieces in a shallow stone pan set near, not over, the lamp close enough to learn warmth without learning impatience. The pan's surface darkens as the fat relaxes. She turns pieces with a carved spatula, lifting and laying them so none feel ignored. A slow gloss spreads. Drops gather, linger, and then join one another, amber as tea in thick glass. The smell is sea and cream richness, not sharp, not smoky winter's answer to the question of flame. She tips the pan and lets the oil run into a storage bowl through a strainer woven from willow bark and sinew. The filter holds back impurities, small crumbs of connective tissue that would spoil if they stayed. A spoon skims the top for any froth that pretends to be oil. She wipes the spoon on a scrap that will later feed the shoulder fire. The oil rests, clears, and shines. She pours some into a smaller stone cup with a beak for pouring, the kind that lets a hand draw a thread along the wick without spilling a story onto the floor. Wickwork waits in a shallow basket. Strands of dried moss, gathered on a sun-still day months ago, lie there like green-brown hair. She rubs them between her palms until they loosen into soft, feathery rope. Tundra cotton down from willows and cotton grass caught with careful fingers in summer sits in a separate pouch. She mixes a pinch of the down into the moss to teach the wick gentleness. With thumb and forefinger she twists 3 thin strands together, then folds and twists again, building a loose braid that drinks well and gives flame a steady library to read. At the braid's end she ties a small knot, not to hold forever, only to remind the wick where it began. Drying new moss for later can happen even now. She keeps a narrow frame of willow twigs near the lamp for such days. Across it she spreads damp moss that came in with yesterday's boots clean, shaken, willing. She sets the frame at the outer ring of warmth, far from the flames in patience. Every hour she will turn it, not by clock but by the lamp's own slow meter, when the pot whispers again, when the child laughs twice, when a stitch line reaches an elbow. Drying is not a race. Winter has given them time. Sewing moves the room toward quiet. The man leans forward, sinew thread drawn long and thin by his teeth, and fits a bone needle through a boot's throat where learned to speak. He bites the seam with the needle and rocks it gently through, then draws the thread snug. Sinew softens in spit and stiffens as it dries, locking the hole against water that loves to learn new puffs. At the boot's heel he lays a small patch of sealskin shade thin. He stitches around it with short, agreeing steps. The sound of sinew through hide is a whispering zipper from a century that has not arrived yet. The woman sets aside the rendering and takes up an anorak seam that has remembered to open in a shy place along the side. She pricks holes with an awl made from bird bone, each hole a finger's width from the next. The awl's handle, wrapped in skin, warms to her grip. With the bone needle she laces the seam in a lapped stitch and rubs a trace of oil along the thread with her thumb so it will choose flexibility over pride. She knots the end in a flat knot, then presses it with her nail so it will forget to catch on wool. The child sits close to the lamp's shallow warmth with a game of small bones, knuckle bones smoothed on beach stones, arranging them in lines and tiny houses. The lamp's flame reflects on the polished corners. The child counts them like reindeer in a story, though no reindeer walk this ice. Now and then the child blows a thin breath across the flame and laughs when it wavers. The woman smiles and holds her pick ready. The wick's edge may need a trim if gains turn into gusts. Heat is shaped with small moves. A slab of ice, cut clean outside and wiped with a palm, stands in a wooden trough near the lamp. A bone hook hangs from the ceiling. From it dangles a shell with a hole drilled in the lip. With a thong she adjusts the shell's height over the lamp so drips from melting ice drop into the water pot and not onto sleeping skins. She slides a flat stone under the platform's front edge, raising the lamp's face by a finger's breadth so warmth leans toward the sleeping platform. The room answers. The air near the bed thickens to a calm that feels like fur. She trims the wick with the picks flat again, lifting char where flame darkens. As charcoal curls away, the flame steps higher in little proud increments, and then settles back to the right shoe size of blue at its base. She feeds it a line of fresh oil with the beaked cup just a thread drawn in a steady left-to-right motion. The wick drinks. Flame approves, shoulders squared but not boastful. Gentle commentary can rest here. In many houses, the lamp's edges taught a shape with a shell or a slipped knife so oil runs even along the wick. Some keep a pinch of ash lamp black in a small pouch for marking scenes or teaching faces to carry lines on winter festivals. This soot, made from home's own light, carries a quiet prestige. Today it stays in its pouch, black and patient. Outside, snow shifts its tune. The entry tunnel sighs a low settling that asks for a glance. The man pulls on his mitts with the teeth of his grin and ducks into the passage. He presses gently at the tunnel's roof with the flat of his mitt and judges the weight. Satisfied, he scrapes a finger's worth of drift from a corner and packs the curve tighter. The tunnel, pleased, keeps its shape. He returns with a flick of wind stowed in his hood and brings with him a new coal for the lamp to instruct. The woman sets a small pot over the lamp again, this time half filled with water and a handful of frozen berries loosened by earlier warmth. She adds a shred of dried willow leaf and a thumb tip of scraped ginger wrap, and saved from summer trade. The pot breathes slow perfume, red and brown and a faint green. She lifts the cup and gives the first pour to the child. The cup is warm, not hot. The child blows and drinks like a careful old person, and grows taller by a thumb in pride. Moss on the frame has passed from damp to merely cool. She turns it and feels the stiff tips surrender to fleece. When dry, she will crush it lightly so it remembers the wick's braid. She sets aside a small bag where she stores what the lamp will eat in coming days, a pantry for fire. A scrap of meat, still cold at the heart, is set on a flat stone at the lamp's rim to thaw. It melts at the edges and shines. She flips it once, then twice, and shears small bites around. The child eats with teeth that have learned patience. The man grunts appreciation without inventing new words. The woman takes the last bite as she takes the last look at most things as keeper and witness. The lamp's oil bowl needs a wipe where a drop misread its path. She takes a strip of soft skin and pulls it along the rim so the curve stays smooth, then folds the strip for later rinsing with snow. Clean stone is not a matter of appearance, it is the ground of the lamp's good mood. She moves the pot aside and lets the flame's edge breathe free. The dome's vent is pinched a finger narrow. The room thickens to a comfortable hush. Tools on pegs look like runes. The snow walls, lit from below, glow like milk held to a window. Work turns to smaller things. She snips a new phone for the child's hood, rolling it between her palms to smooth the edges. The child holds one end and tugs with ceremony. They laugh at the tug-of-war only as long as the thread would want to tangle, then they stop at the perfect moment that teaches threads not to ply. The rendering pan has yielded its gift. She decants the last gold into the storage bowl and covers it with a round skin secured by a thong. She presses the cover's center to let air out and watches the seal draw. Fresh oil will sleep until the lamp asks for breakfast again. Outside, wind finds a new idea and tries it on the house. The entry answers with a small, hollow tone that means snow is writing another line on the tunnel. Inside, the flame keeps its sentence without spelling errors. The platform glows with warmth you feel with calves and back. Breath loosens. Sinew dries into stitch. Boots learn readiness. The day, by this clock, is half spent and not at all wasteful. Afternoon arrives by changing the lamp's reflection on the dome. The glow shifts from pearl to butter. The woman hears thee are not by a bell but by the softness in her own shoulders. It is a good time for teaching. The child, full of warm berries and pride, sits with knees tucked, hands ready, eyes like to small lamps waiting their wicks. She begins with safety as a story. The lamp is a guest, she says. Feed it, greet it. Do not crowd it. She places the bone pick in the child's hand, guiding grip so the flat end rests on the thumb and the point lies quiet. Together they approach the flame from the side, not from above. The child lifts a whisper of char, the flame wavers, then steadies with a small blue chew at its base. See, the woman says. It breathes better. The child nods and hands the pick back with two hands, a ceremony learned from adults giving knives. Next, the oil thread. She fills the beaked cup a finger's width and shows how to draw a thin line along the wick from left to right, never letting the cup's lip touch flame. The child follows, tongue showing at the corner of the mouth. A small tremor of oil puddles at one point. The woman tips the lamp a fraction, letting the pool run along the curve and spread thin. If it gathers, she says, we help it walk. The child repeats the words and touches the lamp's stone like greeting a polite animal. Tools also get their lesson. She lays the ulu on a flat slab of stone smoothed by years of sharpening. The blade's half-moon is clean but dull enough to make work long. From a pouch she takes sandstone, wetting it with a finger dipped in the pot. She strokes the edge in slow arcs, keeping the angle faithful. Listen, she says, and the child hears the fine rasp become silk. She turns the blade, gives the other side the same patience, and tests it on a strip of sinew. The blade sighs through with no argument. She wipes the edge with a thumb and oil to keep rust a stranger. The child is allowed one small pass with the stone guarded so hands will remember how sound and feel tell of sharpness. Then the Yulu returns to its place, handle up, blade hidden in a wrap of skin so fingers wandering in stored time will not learn surprise. Snow bed and vent need their seasonal kindness. The man lifts the sleeping platform's front mat. Beneath, the snow front has sunk a little where hips and knees persuaded it. With a short bone scraper he shaves the surface to level, pushing curls of snow into a wooden pan. The curls look like tiny white shavings from a carpenter's joy. He presses new snow from a block into the low places, and then smooths with the scrapers flat until the surface feels like a table set by the careful. He lays the mat back, it lies honest and unwrinkled. The bed will hold warmth better now and share it with backs that carried weight. At the dome's vent, a small ring of ice has crept around the edge, making the flap reluctant. The woman stands on the bench and presses the ice with warm fingers until it loosens. She shaves a thin rind away with a dull knife meant for ice and not for hide. The flap opens and closes with a clean voice again. She adjusts its thong so wind will not snatch it to play. Fresh air, disciplined, greets the room. The flame bends and then forgets bending. The stew begins as a string of small decisions. She sets a heavier pot on the bone hook, lower than teeth, higher than boil. Into the pot go shaved bits of meat, a handful of thin sliced fat, and a spoon of the rendered oil. She adds snow with a wooden spoon until it becomes water again around the meat. A pinch of dried seaweed crumbles in her fingers, green-brown and briny, it will lend salt, and the taste of summer like trapped in fronds. From a bag of roots kept in frost outside, she brings in a small piece of wild onion, minced fine with the Yule on a clean board, and slides it into the pot with the blade's easy lift. The stew finds its voice soft glugs, a burble that respects the lamp's even line. She skims with the wooden spoon, not to make it thin, only to keep it tidy. Now and then she lifts a drop and blows, testing both heat and patience. The lamp is turned a breath higher with a stroke to the wick. The flame walks taller along the crescent and then settles. Smell moves through the house like a song without words. Stories come with slow food. The man begins one with a rope in his hands, fingers knotting and unknotting as he speaks. He tells of a summer when the ice broke early and the boat moved as if it had remembered. It was a seal. He shows a knot the old ones taught him for lines that must never lie. The child copies the knot, tongue out again, and makes a polite pretzel that will hold nothing. They laugh, then try again. The second looks more like a promise. The third begins to believe itself. The man sets it aside where pride can see it. The woman's story is quieter, bent around tools. She tells of her mother's lamp, smaller, darker, carried across a difficult spring. We fed it with every scrap, she says, and it fed us with light. Her hands measure all by habit even as she measures words. She trims the wick at a place where smoke nearly thought of beginning. The child watches the trimming more than the story, which is how stories join fingers first and memory later. While still learns its depth, she tends wicks for tomorrow. The frame of moss is ready. It crinkles into softness at her pinch. She braids 3 new cords, setting them in a shallow tray. Each cord carries a small knot at one end, a language between lamp and keeper that says start here. She powders her fingers, with a whisper of ash soot kept for marking, and touches a seam on the anorak to show where the next patch will sit. The black line is faint enough to obey, bold enough to remember. The child is given a safe errand: fetch snow. A small scoop and a skin bag join small boots and careful steps in the entry tunnel. The outside air embraces the child with the familiar polite sharpness of winter. Snow is gathered from a clean drift, sliced with the scoop to pure flakes, bag shaken once to dust away wind's crumbs, then carried back like treasure. The child's cheeks glow apple red. The woman opens the bag and tips a little into the pot. "Good," she says. "You have brought us water that has not yet learned ground." A simple dessert waits on the lamps, rim slivers of frozen fish laid thin to glaze. They turn translucent, and then turn sweet under teeth. The child licks a finger and makes a face that means delight, a face seen on older faces with less decoration. The man pretends not to want a piece until someone insists. Then he takes to pieces with a fairness that makes both disappear. She tastes the stew. The spoon's path from pot to mouth is a study in small distances. She nods and adds a last pinch of dried herb also saved from trade, a memory of pepper. Bowls come forward, wood turned smooth, each with a notch that tells the hand which belongs to whom. She ladles with evenness. The first bowl goes to the child, the second to the man, the last to herself, with a spoonful of broth returned to the pot as thanks to the day. They eat in spoon slow quiet. The stew fills places food should fill and leaves room for breath to remain untroubled. The lamp lowers a hand's breadth, flame shortens at her request. Warmth is now for comfort, not cooking. The pot slides aside to the cooler zone and sighs. After bowls are wiped clean with a twist of snow and set upside down to dry, she returns to teaching. The child practices lifting char with the pick, this time without her hand, then feeds a line of oil along the wick. A small flare thinks about happening. The child cuts it with firm breaths and looks up for approval. Approval is a small nod and a smaller smile, the good kind that lodges like a pebble of pride in a pocket. Tools are tended while stories move to the past's small corners. A fox that learned not to steal boots, a kettle that boiled only when sung to, a storm that waited outside the entry and left politely when asked. The child adds a story invented just now about a lamp that wanted a name. They offer names and let the lamp keep silence. It has its own. The house itself gets its shaping touch. She sets a low snow block against the draft by the entry, channels a shallow trench across the floor so melted drips will find the pot and not choose their own path. She smooths the trench with her palm until it gleams. The man lifts the rack of drying, knits a finger higher. The child arranges bones and small stones into a line that means river, and then turns it into a circle that means house. Evening approaches by deepening the blue at the vet. The lamp's flame writes a gentler line. The room becomes rounder, closer, more itself. The woman checks the oil bowl half full and calm. She ties the beaked cup's thong to a peg. She lays a fresh wick braid within reach. She runs the pick once more along the flame's edge, a last kindness for this hour. Outside, the wind pauses to listen. Inside, breath slows by agreement. The lamp, teacher and student both, keeps its steady sentence. Evening gathers by adding weight to quiet. The dome's light turns from butter to cream. The lamp lowers its shoulders at a touch from the pick Shorter flames now each the height of a careful finger. Warmth settles onto mats and skins like a tame animal choosing a place. Chores for night begin in small and hurried loops. The woman wipes the lamp's outer curve with a strip of soft skin, lifting a fine bloom of soot so the stone can keep heat even. She folds the strip once to make a clean edge for tomorrow's wipe, and hangs it on a peg by the vent where smoke will forget it exists. She checks the oil bowl more than half enough until midnight and rests the beat cup beside it with its thumber on a peg so wandering hands will not introduce surprise. The man sorts lines. A length of seal thong dries across his knees while he rubs it with oil so it will choose suppleness over stubbornness. He rolls it into a loose coil, ties it with a half-hitch, and tucks a small sprig of dried willow inside so spring travels secretly with it. A harpoon head, wrapped in skin, is inspected by touch more than sight. The bone socket is sound, the iron gently sharpened earlier this week. He rewraps it and lays it back on its peg, a letter ready to post when ice and sky deliver a day with writing on it. A neighbor announces herself with two taps on the tunnel wall and a small cough the family knows. The woman pulls the draft block aside and welcomes her in with a hand to steady the turn from cold to warm. Snow dust sprinkles the floor, then agrees to melt where the shallow trench invites it. The neighbor shrugs free of her outer parka and sits, palms open to the lamp the way thirsty cups open to tea. Her cheeks bloom from blue to soft red. Hospitality is measured in pieces and paced with heat. The woman lifts the pot she set aside earlier and finds the stew still willing. She adds a splash of water and nudges the wick to taller for a moment, just enough to remind the liquid how to whisper. Bowls appear without ceremony. The neighbor eats slow, her shoulders dropping by degrees as warmth collects under skin. She sets a small parcel on the mat, strips of dried fish and a twist of berry leather payment without tally. The man nods the barter into acceptance. A thank you lives in the tilt of his head rather than in words. The lamp becomes a drum without sound. Stories begin when the beat cup is returned to its peg and the pick lies flat. The neighbor tells one about a winter when lamps burned seal oil salted more than usual, and how the flames wore tall black hats until a grandmother taught them to sit by trimming the wick into deeper braid. They laugh, picturing flames scolded into manners. The man answers with a tale of a night on the ice when the moon turned the pack into a city of white houses and the wind hummed through every door at once. He lays a simple bead on his knee with two fingers, not loud, just a pulse that keeps the story walking. The child listens with the seriousness given to weather. Now and then the child's fingers play at the lamp's shadow on the dome, making bird shapes, and dogs that stick out tongues longer than dogs should. The woman watches flame and shadow both, trimming a thin edge where smoke thinks of practicing. The pick's flat lifts char, the wick straightens, the room's air clears without noticing it had clouded. Later, the neighbor stands to go. The woman wraps a strip of warm moss around the neighbor's hand, gift for her lamp's next wick. The neighbor presses her forehead to the woman's temple, a brief greeting of gratitude fit for close rooms, and disappears into the tunnel. Snow hushes behind her as the draft block returns to its post. The lamp's line brightens a touch, pleased to be the only small sun again. They sheet the night sleeping. Boots are brought nearer the lamp and turned so seams will dry, never too close, never too far. Mitts hang like bats from a line stretched under the dome's shoulder, shadows of soft thumbs pointing towards stories. The sleeping platform receives its skins fluffed and shaken. The lower fur facing up is brushed with a bone comb so it will trap warm air like a net. Under the head places, they slide little pads of dry moss wrapped in skin to accept breath and keep it from making frost pillows by morning. Midnight tending is a ritual of tiny distances. They lie down, man first near the tunnel, woman within, child between. A geography learned overwinters the lamp to their left like the moon seen from a sled. The woman dozes in stitches. Her ears keep watch with more loyalty than eyes. When the lamp's flame lowers itself to modestly, she wakes as if called by name. Without sitting up, she reaches with the pick, trims where char has grown proud, and draws a thread of oil with the beaked cup left to right, steady. Flame rises to the size of good manners, and waits for praise it does not need. Between wakings she listens to the house, a tiny crackle from the dome that means frost writing its flowers, the soft tick of a drop finding the pot, the man's breath turning like a tide, the child's foot discovering the border of a skin and retreating. Outside, wind tries on new voices and keeps none for long. The entry tunnel gives a hollow thrum that is not worry, only snow adding itself to belonging. Once she rises fully. The vent's thong has twisted. She smooths it and opens the flap the width of her little finger. The flame leans and then straightens like someone agreeing to a reasonable request. On her way back she checks the drying frame. Moss has become feather again under her thumb. She turns at once and smiles because preparation hidden inside ordinary hours feels like a secret kept with the future. She sharpens the pick's point with 3 private strokes on the smoothing stone, then turns the tool in her palm so the flat and point introduce themselves to muscles again. She sets it down on the lamp's inner ledge, safe, ready. The man wakes briefly and sits. He pours a small cup of water from the pot and drinks without leaving the rhythm of night. He listens at the tunnel, then returns with a clump of clean snow for the trough. He crushes it between mittened hands until it flows, then tips it where the trench will carry it to the pot's lip. The lamp has taught them to make water without walking the world. Before sleep closes everyone's lids again. They share one more small thing, thin slivers of the neighbor's, berry leather warmed in the air above the lamp. The child laughs at the way it flexes like a little drum, and then chews it into silence. The woman tucks the remainder in a skin packet beside the lamp so tomorrow's morning will find sweetness waiting. Rituals finish with order. The beaked cup is half filled, and set beak out for quick reach. The oil bowl is covered loosely with a thin skin to keep dust from learning to swim. The pick lies flat with its handle toward the sleeping platform. The lamp's face is tilted one finger toward the beds, the flat stone under its base checked so it does not creep. The vent's flap is tied with the knot that will not untie itself. The door block sits firm. The dome gleams faintly, low stars caught in snow. Sleep thickens. The lamp rests in its work. Flame a soft ribbon reminding stone and skin that the sun has not forgotten them, only paused. The house breathes together 3 chests, 1 room, 1 lamp. Outside, the sky tosses a handful of lights and lets cold hold them in place. Pre-dawn is the quiet that chooses to stay. The sky outside is a deep slate with a seam of paler blue where day is thinking. Inside, the lamp's flame has shortened to the height of a careful fingernail, steady but modest. Frost has written a garden on the dome while everyone slept ferns and feathers. leaves that grow from breath. The room smells of clean skin, mild smoke, and the soft richness of sea oil that remembers sea. The woman wakes first, not because a bell rings, but because the air says her name in the language of small chills. She sits up under caribou skins, pulls on mitts for a moment, then takes them off again so her fingers can work with truth. She reaches for the pick, trims a thin shoal of char along the wick, and draws a slender thread of oil with the beaked cup left to right, as always, steady as remembering. The flame grows to its morning height, opens its blue shoe, and begins the day's work without asking for applause. Water comes before words. She lifts the bone hook a finger so the pot sits closer to the flame and feeds its snow cut clean from the drift. Team answers politely. She tilts the vents flap the width of her little finger. Fresh air enters as a guest, not a draft. The man sits, rubs warmth into his hands, and listens at the tunnel. Snow has added another small sentence to the outside wall. He will shave it later. For now, he lays boots near the lamp's leading warmth so seams can wake the 4 feet. The child rolls toward the glow and blinks, hair a halo of sleep electricity. A wooden cup appears like a conjurer's coin, and the woman pours a little hot water into it to warm the wood. She pours it away, then fills again with tea willow leaf this morning, a memory of green. The child holds the cup in both hands, face reflected in its dark calm. A small repair has asked for attention, where the lamp's inner rim shows a nick a bite that could begin to widen if left to wander. The woman empties a little oil from the curve beyond the hurt, and lets the remaining flame walk the far side, short and safe. With a flat tool of bone she wipes the nick clean, and dries it with a scrap of moss warmed in her palm. From a pouch she takes fine soapstone dust saved from an earlier shaping, mixes it with a few drops of water and a breath of oil to make a slow paste, and presses it into the nick with patient thumbs. She smooths the patch in a gentle circle until the seam disappears to eye and remains only to touch. A thong looped from peg to peg steadies a thin strip of wood pressed against the repair. Let it remember flatness, she writes with her hands. The flame, politely confined to the other end of the crescent, burns low while stone and time agree. Breakfast is from the lamp, as most things are. Thin curls of frozen meat soften on a flat stone at the rim that turns translucent, and then kind. She brushes a whisper of oil on a slice of flat bannock made on a good day last week and kept wrapped. Warned, it becomes generous again. They eat without rush, small bites, quiet chewing, eyes following flame as if it were a storyteller beginning a new chapter. The child dips a corner of bread into the pot and looks for permission. Permission is a nod, which tastes better than salt. The man pulls the drying frame closer and rubs his palms over the new moss until it fluffs. He braids a short length himself, slower than the woman, but careful, and ties the small starting knot as he was taught. He lays the braid in a shallow tray, a row of future mornings. He checks the boot soles with thumb and nail, testing for places where ice might find a road. A dull knife for ice, not for hide, scrapes away a raised edge. The sound is a whisper like sand in summer. Outside, the tunnel asks for its shave. He pulls on his outer parka, mitts, and boots, and ducks into the passage. The cold holds his shoulders with a firm but not unfriendly hand. He scrapes the entry's curve with a bone scraper, sending thin curls of snow into a pan, then packs a slim block into a hollow where the night had pressed too much. He smooths the surface with the scraper's flat until it shines like a polite face. From the drift beyond he fetches a block for the water trough, a clear brick that will become tea and soup by afternoon. When he returns, the draft block slides back, and the lamp greets him with a line of fire that seems to say welcome in a language everyone understands. The woman turns to sewing the long edges of a caribou skin over sop that needs new purpose. She warms sinew with breath and lays stitches like soft footprints around the hand. Between each stitch, her eyes flick to the lamp's curve. The repair holds. The thong brace remains until noon. She smiles at the patience of stone. She sets the beaked cup aside and lifts the pot to pour the first tea of morning into the man's cup, then the child's, then her own. A scrap of dried berry leather softens in the steam above each cup and becomes a small sweet to chase the tannin. The child holds up the sweet for the lamp to see before tasting, an invented courtesy that pleases the house. Tasks flow, the man oils a thong, the child counts bone game pieces into rows of 5 and then into pairs, and then decides that pairs look more like sled dogs. The woman tidies tools. Rubbing the Allah's handle with a trace of oil so it will feel like a friend in cold hands. She wipes the lamp's outer rim once more with the soft strip, then hangs it by the vent. She lifts the thong and the tiny brace from the repair. The stone shows a healed plainness. She strokes it with the back of her finger. Good, she says to the lamp the way one speaks to a child who has remembered a line in a song. Gentle commentary can rest here. A house is a circle of agreements between flame and stone, between melt and thirst, between hands and tools, between people and weather. The Qulliq turns those agreements into light. It keeps clocks that match breath and stew and stitch. The vent brightens to the day's best attempt at sun. It is enough. The man sets aside work and stands to feel his back lengthen. He touches the harpoon head in passing, not to wake it, only to remind it that it lives here. The child asks for the pick to practice trimming again. The woman guides, then lets go. The char lifts like bark. The flame stands straighter. The child's small sound of triumph is not loud. Now you know the lamp's left to right, the woman says. The child repeats the words as if they were a charm. Near the entry, mitts have dried. They are turned right side out and beaten gently to lift nap. Boots are brushed with a dull blade to invite oil later. The moss pads under the head places are shaken and replaced with dry ones. The wooden trough that catches drips from the ice block is emptied into the pot and set back so the next drops will find home. A scrap of soot is folded into its pouch and returned to the peg. Mid-morning, the lamp's flame lowers at her request. Cooking is finished, warmth can soften. She draws a shorter line of oil and trims the wick's edge to an even smile. The flame answers smaller and clearer, an obedient handwriting. The dome's frost garden begins to melt at the edges and fade back into snow without grief. The woman lays her hand to the lamp's stone, not the hot inner lip, but the warm outer curve, and leaves it there long enough to feel today's evenness. The house feels even, 2 tools in place, food inside, boots ready, laughter folded into silence where it can be found later. She breathes in through her nose, out through her mouth, and lets her shoulders tell her the weather inside is kind. For a moment they say nothing. The lamp keeps its sentence, and the day listens. Now these quiet rooms and careful hands will keep you company as you rest. Thank you for listening. May your night be warm, and unhurried sweet dreams.